Well, thank you very much. I mean, I should say that I was very pleased when you contacted me to talk about actually about cosmology. That was what you really wanted me to talk about. But I'm happy that you agreed to my suggestion that we discuss INO, uh, since I think it's very topical and brings to the fore some issues which concern you not just as people doing a master's or a PhD in physics, chemistry, mathematics, biology, whatever it is you're doing, but more to do with your future careers, because uh, this is more a kind of assessment of how science is being done, both internationally and in particular in India, under somewhat more special circumstances. And INO, I think, is an interesting case study. Now, many of us that you mentioned, we have, of course, been involved with it for a number of years. But nevertheless, I'll try and distance myself as much as possible in this talk and try to take a purely objective view, like someone coming to it for the first time, to try and understand what it is about, why it is important, and why there has been so much controversy about it. That is reflected in the subtitle I've given my talk. It's a twisted tale, right? And it is very much an indigenous project and a mega science project. So, where do you stand with it now? Now, this is a picture of the mountain under which INO is proposed to be built. All right, so let me continue then, um, and make this full screen so you can see. Right. Now, India, as you might know, has engaged on several so-called mega science projects. And last year, I was in fact in India, in Bangalore and Hyderabad for a couple of months. And there was this exhibition that was being held in several metros, in which the government, in association with the Department of Atomic Energy and National Council of Science Museums, was holding this for the general public. And they were highlighting how the projects that India is engaged in, which are all to do with the pure sciences here, physics in particular, range over a vast scales of time and space, and touch on some of the most interesting questions in physics today. So, starting with the LIGO, the detector for gravitational waves. So, this observatory will be constructed in India, uh, and this is something that was actually approved, as you might know, by the Prime Minister within a week of the first discovery of gravitational waves from a merging pair of black holes being made uh, 3 years ago. Then we have involvement in the International Thermonuclear Reactor Project. This is what is to be the flagship fusion project for the entire world, being based at Cadarache in France. And India is a major player in that, as it is in the 30-meter telescope, which is being led mainly by the Inter-University Center for Astronomy and Astrophysics at Pune, in collaboration with all the other astronomy centers in India, Bangalore and Nainital and so on. And then you have the square kilometer array. This is the largest experiment to be done in radio astronomy. And India has a rich tradition in radio astronomy and is fully engaged in it, led by the National Center for Radio Astronomy also at Pune. And then we have the FAIR. This is the accelerator for antimatter and nuclear physics, which is at Darmstadt in Germany. And the Saha Institute of Nuclear Physics and other institutes in India are fully engaged in this. And of course, all of us have heard of CERN, where there is major involvement from India in the CMS experiment in particular, and also in ALICE, the heavy ion experiment. And this has been going on for a number of years and came to light, was highlighted very prominently with the recent discovery of the Higgs boson. So you've heard of all of this. And the last one that has been put here, which is supposedly probing back to the earliest moments of the universe, is this project called INO. which is what we are going to talk about. And of course, the investment in all these mega projects is justified easily because, as we all know, uh, research in pure sciences is not only intellectually exciting, but we recognize it as also fulfilling other major needs. For a start, it provides training. It provides training in cutting edge questions, which are intellectually challenging, which therefore attract the best minds. And once you learn how to ask a question, and then, of course, to progress towards answering it, you are well equipped to do that in any arena, not necessarily just in physics or chemistry or maths, but more broadly. And moreover, projects like this require collaboration. And we know from examples such as CERN that that is a very important way in which we have mutual understanding developing between nations. You know, people from both India and Pakistan work on the same experiment at CERN. I think I need say no more to understand what the importance of a forum like that can be for mutual understanding. So it is quite clear why India wants to participate in this. I know some people in India might have questions about, can we afford to do all this? And these are a few of the answers one would give to questions like that. But one can discuss more on this. But let's move on to INO and what it says about INO in the leaflet that was put out at this Vigyan's Samagram. And it's showing neutrinos being produced by interactions of cosmic rays in the atmosphere, penetrating down through that mountain you showed down to some underground cavern, which will be accessed by a tunnel. And apparently these neutrinos will be studied by some detector there. And note that it is the India-based Neutrino Observatory. It is not the Indian Neutrino Observatory because it is foremost a place where there can be also international collaboration, and the people who conceived of INO thought of it from the very beginning as an experiment for all of humankind. It is nothing parochial. Now, these are a few pages from that booklet. I'm sorry it's not very clear. The people who prepared this booklet should actually consult the scientists as to how to present the type a bit more clearly, but it presents the basic facts that the government approved the INO project in 2015, that the flagship detector is something called ICAL, the Iron Calorimeter, and this will be essentially organized by the Interinstitutional Center for High Energy Physics, which has been set up in Madurai, and that this is where the technology will be developed and the laboratory will be run. And this cavern is under 1,000 meters of rock, which provides a natural advantage in that it screens out the background from cosmic rays and so on. And that INO can do all kinds of experiments, which I'll discuss in more detail. So there is a good science case for it. And there will be other experiments to follow. For example, experiment on dark matter, which is currently being, R&D is being developed by the Science Institute of Nuclear Physics, and so on, right? And in fact, there are many institutes in India involved in this project, so you can count them. This is 1, 2, 3, 6 times 5, 30 minus 2, 28 institutes are currently involved in INO. And once it gets going, no doubt other smaller groups from various places will also join in. But these are the leaders. And the technologies that have been developed for INO is something that is actually doable. This can be done in India. It's basically a large iron calorimeter. It'll have an electromagnet. And the prototype for this, as I mentioned, has already been built. And the innovative thing are these things called RPCs, which will be made of glass rather than of plastic, as is more often done. I see there is a question in the chat box about tell us about dark matter. I'm afraid that will be a distraction for the moment. I'll come back to dark matter at the end of my talk. So to continue,
Subir sir,
yeah.
it's actually a cracking sound at your end. So
Oh,
if
I
the
see. So
on this,
maybe that was my headphones. I'll try and keep my hands clear of that.
yeah.
So also to continue the government spiel, there are many Indian industries involved. One of the high points about a experimental laboratory like CERN is that every industry in Europe or anywhere in the world for that matter wants to be associated with it. They're very proud when they get a contract to provide equipment to CERN, right? Usually at the lowest bid. That is the policy there, because that shows to the world that you can actually develop technology at the very cutting edge to the highest standards possible. So the hope is, of course, that by having mega projects such as these in India, one would also motivate and engage Indian industry. And this sort of brings me to this general question that people often ask, should India be doing this kind of abstract research in physical sciences? I mean, what about all these problems like global warming, and we need energy, we need innovation in agriculture, in transport, healthcare, we have to have better cities and all kinds of things. Why are we doing experiments on neutrinos? Well, there are some basic points which I think need highlighting, and these are very broad. These are not just about physics, it's about science in general. And obviously, all of you know this, but I think it is worth reminding ourselves of why we do what we do and what it is that you are really trying to do. Essentially, we are trying to understand the physical universe, and we are trying to understand it in simple terms. The word simple, of course, has to be qualified, and that takes some years to understand what we actually mean by simple, because, of course, to the lay public, it can appear very, very complex. The crucial thing is that we only make progress by experimental test. Of course, theory is very, very important. Theory without experiment is very, very important. It is guided by mathematical consistency, and some ideas turn out to be very productive. They generate lots of new directions, and we therefore judge them on that basis. But ultimately, we need experiment to demonstrate that we have really understood how nature works. And this involves looking for basic principles underlying the diversity of phenomena that we see in nature, and we create new frameworks based on hardcore mathematics to do that. So doing this kind of work essentially provides us training in how to ask the right questions, okay, before we can even start to answer them. And I think you will agree with me that this is a pretty good strategy when it comes to addressing any question, whether to do with neutrinos or to do with global warming. And moreover, in India, we have a very distinguished history of contributions to fundamental science. I mentioned just some of them here for lack of space. And these are all household names in India. And many of these people were actually distinguished experimentalists. I mean, Jagdish Chandra Bose, for example, was renowned as an experimentalist. So was, of course, C.V. Raman. And Meghnad Saha, you may not know, he is known, of course, for his equation, but he also did experiments. In fact, he was somewhat frustrated in doing so due to lack of available state-of-the-art equipment. And it is that lack that we are trying to address today by doing more advanced experiments, not just breakthroughs in theory such as Satyan Bose did, but Homi Bhabha in particular pioneered the modern era of experimental science that we are doing, mega science that we are doing in India. And of course, at the same time, we have had very important contributions from people like Amol Raychaudhuri, general relativity, and Chandrasekhar, and Sudarshan, and so on. So I think it is important not to just rest on our laurels. This work has to be continued, okay? And by today's generation, I mean you. So no pressure, okay? But this is what you're talking about. Now, some years ago, about 10 years ago, there was actually a lot of interest in the fact that India was beginning to invest in major projects, these mega science projects that we are talking about. And Physics Today did an article on India in December 2012 and 2011, sorry. And I recall on that occasion, Obaid Siddiqui, who essentially founded modern molecular biology in India, he was at the Tata Institute. He said, in the old days, we had no money, but we had people. Today, we have the money, but not the people. And this was, in fact, a very astute observation. Obaid, of course, had himself built up a whole dynamic field of research in India, and he knew what he was talking about. And in fact, even in physics world, the article that appeared on Indian Science, it sort of said, in money for research is not in short supply, but what India currently lacks is the critical concentration of highly capable scientists who can make the country a world leader. Right now, of course, we are always sensitive about criticism, but I think we all agreed that this was a valid point. This was a fair point. We, given the size of our population, we have a scientific task force which is looks impressive, presented in a certain way. But when you actually ask how many scientists are there who can really make us world leaders by doing cutting edge research in either theory or experiment, it's really a handful relative to our population. So I think it is clear that there was a strong case for engaging in large science projects. And indeed, India has gone for it. I mean, I mentioned CERN and the compact muon solenoid, which, well, Navamondal was involved with that before he turned to INO. And then we have this facility at Darmstadt I mentioned for nuclear physics bordering onto particle physics. And then we have this gigantic fusion reactor at Kadirash. We have the 30-meter telescope on Mauna Kea in Hawaii. We have LIGO India, which is going to require building this huge, long vacuum chamber mounted seismically so that it can support this extremely delicate and sensitive laser instrument inside, and the square kilometer array, which is coming up in South Africa and Australia. And we also have Indian projects which have international participation. So a very well-known one is the giant meter radio telescope in Pune that Govind Swarup, who pioneered radio astronomy in India, it was his brainchild, and it has come to fruition. And my colleagues from Oxford regularly go and observe on it because it is available to the entire world. Then there is Astrosat, the satellite that actually was a long time in coming, but now that it is in fact uh, up in orbit, it is doing great. Fantastic results are coming from it, and that too has a open observing time program that anyone in the world can apply for. And finally, the India-based Neutrino Observatory. And you can see some of the people who are actually now connected on this call there in that picture. And that is what will be the topic of the rest of my talk, right? There are, of course, other projects which I have not mentioned here. Now, the first thing I know people do these days when they want to find out what something is about is turn to Wikipedia. And I must say, for a change, the Wikipedia and entry on INO is not at all bad. It has clearly been looked at by people who know something about it. And it, in fact, the facts are basically correct. And this sort of repeats what I read out to you earlier from the leaflet on INO that was distributed at the time of their exhibition last year. And it mentions some highlights, for example, that its main magnet will be 4 times larger than the biggest magnet currently there in the CMS experiment at CERN. And this experiment is meant to study neutrinos. Now, I know you told me that not all of you are physicists, so I should briefly say what neutrinos are. Now, of course, this summary of the particle content of the universe according to our so-called standard model itself can take up a whole lecture, because this, after all, took a long, long time to arrive at. But let me just say in summary that we understand today that all the matter that we are made of, protons and neutrons that make up our nuclei, they are made out of up and down quarks. Okay, these have a charge 2/3 and -1/3, and they interact together via exchange of particles called gluons, which is the strong force. And also they have charges, electric charges, so they also interact via photons. And then you have in the same family, as it's called, the electron, which is of course, the major constituent of the atom, along with the nucleus, and that is responsible for all of chemistry. And these atoms can bind together into molecules, and then you have biology. So all of phenomena, physical phenomena, can be ultimately reduced to the dynamics of these particles. And then there is the neutrino, which was discovered much after the electron, because it is invisible, essentially, because it has no electric charge and it has no color charge. This is the color interaction. So it only interacts via the weak interactions. And for that, there are two other particles that mediate those interactions, the W gauge boson and the Z gauge boson. And these particles interact in the weak interactions as well, but only these interact in the strong interaction, and this also has electromagnetic interaction. The neutrino has no electromagnetic or strong interaction. It only has the weak interaction. And moreover, there is a very interesting aspect, which is that it violates the fundamental symmetry of nature, parity. We expect that a process seen in a mirror should be identical to the process in front of the mirror. But it was a great surprise, a very breathtaking event in the 1950s and 60s, when it was discovered that this fundamental symmetry of nature is actually violated in practice. What we thought was a symmetry is in fact hidden from us or broken. And neutrinos only come in a left-handed version, and these are the particles that have full-strength weak interactions. There is no right-handed neutrino, as there is for the other particles, the leptons and the quarks. And this is actually rather important. This will have a direct bearing on why neutrinos are expected to be massless in the Standard Model. Now, apart from this here, there are two other families. These are just photocopies of these two. We still don't understand why there are three variations. This is the famous so-called flavor problem. But in fact, in practice, it is very, very interesting that there are three copies, because it then means that the mathematical structure, the mixing matrix, which describes how these particles quantum mechanically mix with each other, is a 3 by 3 matrix. So it can have a complex phase in it, for those of you who understand what I'm talking about. And that then opens, the arena is then open to new phenomena, such as violation of charge parity, going beyond parity, and thereby of creating, for example, the excess of matter in the universe over antimatter in principle. So you can already see that this humble particle can, in principle, play a role in many crucial ways. Whether it has mass or not can establish whether the Standard Model of elementary particles is all that there is, or there is something beyond it. And we already know the answer to that. Neutrinos do have mass, because we have discovered that they oscillate between the different flavors, and that means that they have to have mass, and thereby there has to be new physics beyond the Standard Model. And that new physics may well be responsible for other natural phenomena that puzzle us, like the dark matter or the genesis of matter over antimatter. And then there is, of course, the Higgs field, which I have not mentioned so far. And it is this that gives mass to all these particles, but it cannot give a mass to the neutrino for the reason I've just mentioned. There is no right-handed neutrino. For the neutrino to have a mass, in all likelihood, will require a new kind of mechanism, one that requires the neutrino to be its own antiparticle, which is even more bizarre. But it is only possible for the neutrino because the neutrino, as I said, is neutral. So it can actually be its own antiparticle. It does not violate electric charge. It does not violate color charge, any of the gauge charges. It only violates lepton number, the quantum number that characterizes different particles. And lepton number, well, technically we call it, it's a global symmetry, not a gauge symmetry. Now, these are just words. I cannot explain them right now, but I'm mentioning them for those of you who are interested in these issues and can pursue this questions yourself later. So let me come back to INO. INO is to be built under the mountain and to be accessed by this tunnel, as is shown here. So you can see it will have a kilometer of overburden rock, and that is crucial for absorbing the background from cosmic rays, which are absorbed by the mountain above it. And it will be 50,000 tons of iron with a huge magnet, as I mentioned, the biggest one in the world, to separate particles from antiparticles, to identify them separately. And it mentions various things here that INO would do, which I'll come to in more detail later. I want to emphasize that right from the beginning, the people who conceived of INO realized the importance of training young people to do this kind of physics, and they started a graduate program, as it says here, in 2008. And this has been turning out a lot of PhDs. I think at last count, there were at least 40, perhaps more by now. And you can see here a school at which many of them are present. I'm not sure which year this was. Now, the fact that this is an important topic, we already know, but if someone who is not a physicist wants some evidence of that, we can point them to the fact that the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2015 was awarded for the discovery of neutrino oscillations, which shows that neutrinos have mass, as I mentioned, right? And this was shared by Takaki Kajita, who is of the Subakamikande experiment in Japan, which has been a pioneer in this kind of experiments, and Arthur MacDonald, who is at the SNO, the Sudbury Neutrino Observatory in Canada, which in fact was studying solar neutrinos, whereas Kajita and his colleagues were studying atmospheric neutrinos, which is the same source that INO intends to study. Now, I like the blurb that the Nobel Prize organization put out. I know they kind of, agonize over every word they say there, because it has to be as clear as possible and factually correct, and also, of course, informative. And in fact, I think they did a good job on this one. They have explained that this is a historic discovery because neutrinos were considered to be massless, but these oscillations show that they must have some mass, however small, and this clearly shows that the standard model cannot be the complete theory of the fundamental constituents of the universe. So you can appreciate just how important a discovery this is. This is the first laboratory evidence we have that the standard model is not complete. Okay? And as an aside, I think particle physicists are the only people in the world crazy enough that, having managed to put together a model which is a beautiful and quantitatively perfect description of all phenomena that we can study, we then try our best to wreck it. We try to find some chink in it, some hole in it. We try to find some fault with it, right? There is nothing like the standard model, the elegance, the simplicity, the overarching reach in other fields of science, right, to my knowledge. But it is our nature to not be satisfied and just sit on our laurels, because we know that the standard model of particle physics, although it describes everything in the laboratory, it explains very little about the universe as a whole. It does not explain by itself why there is matter in the universe and no antimatter. It does not explain what is the nature of the dark matter that clearly dominates over the matter in the standard model that we are made of. It has nothing to say about the nature of dark energy. It does not tell you how the universe was born, why there were little fluctuations that have grown into the large-scale structure of galaxies that we inhabit today. All these questions are not answered by the standard model. So to answer those questions, we have to go beyond the standard model. And we are really grateful to nature for having given us this gift of neutrino oscillations, which is, relatively speaking, a simple phenomenon. It's just quantum mechanics. You can understand it as an undergraduate. You don't need to go beyond that. Of course, to study it in detail, you also need to then, particularly how neutrinos propagate in matter, you have to learn field theory and so on. But it is actually surprisingly tractable. It is not something that, like string theory, you have to know a huge deal of mathematics before you can understand and appreciate string theory. This is not true for neutrino oscillations. It is much more, in my opinion, accessible. Now, these neutrinos we are talking about are, as I said, coming from the atmosphere, and this shows a cosmic ray particle hitting a nucleus at the top of the atmosphere. It generates a lot of pions and kaons, short-lived particles that then decay to make more particles. For example, the pion decays into a muon. The muon, this pion is very short-lived. The muon actually lives for a microsecond, which may not seem that long, but remember these particles are traveling very close to the speed of light. Their relativistic Lorentz factors are very large. So for them, a microsecond in their own rest frame corresponds to enough time for them to actually come through 50 kilometers of atmosphere and pass through a detector that I might be holding in my hand at ground level. So they're time dilated. We see this every day, that special relativity works. You know, uh, time intervals are dilated. And this is what is going to study. But let me also mention that if you look at this plot of the flux of neutrinos versus their energy, and this is a log scale in GeV. So this is atmospheric flux is between, say, 1 GeV to something like 100 TeV or so. Whereas there are other neutrinos which are expected to also be there from, for example, active galactic nuclei. These gigantic black holes which are in the centers of galaxies are believed to be shooting out cosmic rays which interact with matter and create neutrinos. Gamma ray bursts similarly are expected to create neutrinos. The propagation of cosmic rays through intergalactic space when they interact with the cosmic microwave background should create these so-called Greisen, Zaxepin, Kuzmin neutrinos. And coming to lower energies, at MeV energies, we have already seen neutrinos from the core collapse of a supernova in 1987, February, in the Large Magellanic Cloud. And we have also seen neutrinos at MeV energies from the sun, from the fusion reactions in the sun, right? So these are already been observed, and this is in fact the observations for which McDonald and the Snow collaboration got the Nobel Prize. We also expect that there should be a relic background of neutrinos from all the supernovae that have ever happened, which is going to be a target for next generation experiments. And finally, just as there is a cosmic photon background, there is also should be a cosmic neutrino background at very, very low energies. This is at milli-electron volts. And detecting this will really be a challenge. But we are fairly confident that it is there because it also leaves its imprint in an indirect way in the cosmic microwave background. And we have already seen the effect of this neutrino background on that. So our interest today is in this atmospheric neutrinos. As you see, there is some data there. And let us see how we study that. But before that, I want to mention that India has a particular interest in this because it was in India that these neutrinos were first discovered in this experiment at the bottom of the Kolar goldfield, the Kolar mines. And Novomondol was in fact did his PhD on this experiment. But in 1965, this was an experiment done in collaboration with Osaka City University and the University of Durham. And they published a paper in Physics Letters, in fact, on Independence Day, 1965, which showed the evidence for a muon neutrino, which had created a muon. The neutrino itself is, as I said, neutral, but it can create a charged particle by exchange of a W boson, the muon, and the muon leaves a track in this, what is by today's standard a rather crude detector. But it is this that established that neutrinos are actually being generated in the atmosphere. And these people were quite lucky because barely 2 weeks later, there was another paper in Physical Review Letters reporting the same discovery done in a mine in South Africa, led by Fred Reines, who had already been awarded the Nobel Prize for the first detecting neutrinos. So this was one example case in which we were lucky, we were not scooped. In fact, the first in showing this. I have to say that recently, in 2015, there was an anniversary event held at the Royal Society in London, where people from the Durham group reminded us of all of this historic discovery. And I must say, it was a very interesting event, and there's some nice talks. But I was a little sad that there was nobody from India present at that event, because this experiment could only be done because of the foresight of the people involved in building that laboratory in the Kolar goldfield. Now, fast forward to 1998, and now we have a Nobel Prize award for the same uh, 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 studies which have been continuing in Japan. They're also looking at cosmic rays interacting in the atmosphere. And these neutrinos, as is shown in this cartoon, can actually penetrate through the entire Earth. Their rate of interaction is so weak. And a clear expectation from these atmospheric neutrinos that you should have this ratio of 2 muon neutrinos to 1 electron neutrino. But what was found in practice was actually somewhat different. The practice required building a gigantic detector, which was 50 kilotons as well, just like for INO, but this was 50 kilotons of water, not iron. So it is a rather bigger detector. And it was built under the Kamioka mountain in Japan, a small village town in Japan, 1 kilometer underground, also accessed by a horizontal tunnel, as is shown here. And this detector is filled with pure water, and all these little dots that you see there are huge phototubes which are looking for flashes of light which are emitted by the muons that are going through this detector, as well as other particles. And when a muon goes to the detector, it emits Cherenkov light, and I'll show you that shortly in more detail. And that leaves a ring like this, and you can measure this, and that's how you know a muon has gone through. If instead it is an electron, then unlike the muon, the electron loses energy as it progresses. So as it slows down, the cone angle becomes smaller and smaller. So you see this whole thing gets filled in compared to this one. And so you can tell that this is an electron and this is the muon. And the Kamiokande people, Super Kamiokande people led by Kajita, who had actually done his PhD on Kamiokande earlier, under the guidance of Totsuka, who had earlier got a Nobel Prize for the discovery of solar neutrinos. He pointed out, and his collaborators, of course, these are all major collaborations, they all work together, that if you look at the spectrum of these neutrinos that is expected, you have pretty good agreement with what is expected for low energy electrons and low energy and high energy electron-like events. But if you look at the muon-like events, then there is clear disagreement between the data and what is expected. Right? Now, this plot by itself is not informative except to those who are actually understand what it's telling us. But it was telling us that these neutrinos are oscillating, and it is for that that Kajita was awarded the Nobel Prize along with the Super Kamiokande collaboration. Now, you wanted me to say, sorry?
Sir. So there's a question on the chat.
Yeah.
So Vatsal is asking, why does the muon not lose energy while going through water?
Yeah, the muon also loses energy, but the muon is a much heavier particle than the electron. The muon is 105 MeV, the electron is only half MeV. So it's over 200 times more massive, and therefore the energy, the ionization energy loss rate is much, much smaller. So muon is what we call a minimum ionizing particle. It does lose energy, otherwise you'd not be able to detect it, but it doesn't lose energy at the same rate. And I'll show you an actual animation of that happening. So you wanted me to say something about the experiment that I participate in. I'll just show you 2-3 slides because I don't want to take up time on this. This is worth a separate talk. And but I think it will give some idea also of the competition that I know is meeting in the rest of the world. Okay, the intention is to do an experiment in India which will be operating at the same level as any of these gigantic experiments in the rest of the world. So this one is at the South Pole, and it's actually uses the South Polar cap as a natural detector for generating this Cherenkov radiation, because as you go down below the surface where there is the actual laboratory, if you go down far enough below, in practice they had to go down up to 2.5 kilometers, the ice is under such pressure that all the air bubbles are excluded from it and it becomes totally transparent. So then any light in the ice will propagate long enough that if you put down strings of detectors which carrying the same photomultipliers that are there in the Subir Sarkar experiment, but of course they have to be in a protected glass housing because the pressure down there can reach several hundreds of atmospheres. And all the data is digitized on board and then carried up to the surface down these cables. So the cables sort of look like that. And there are 86 of these strings right now in the ice with 125 meters between them. And on each string, there are 60 of these modules strung 17 meters apart. So in total, there are over 5,000 of these modules in the ice. And they were installed over a period of 7 years, starting in 2004, which is when I joined IceCube. And now we have nearly 10 years of data. We are taking data as we started putting the strings in. So the total instrumented volume is a gigaton. So this is a little bigger than Subir Sarkar because we are actually going to higher energies where the flux of neutrinos that you're looking for is much, 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 much smaller. It's a million times smaller than the atmospheric neutrinos. And so here is the traditional picture of the Eiffel Tower to give you scale. In fact, you have a separate detector which has got more closely spaced strings in the center of IceCube called deep core, and that's about the size of the Eiffel Tower. So you can get an idea of the scale of this experiment. But in fact, it cost quite a lot of money, but I have put it in accessible units. It was only 20 rupees a ton, okay? Because it's a lot of ice. So that's quite cheap, isn't it? Now, to do this kind of experiment, you do need an international collaboration. And IceCube, although half of it is American, there are participants from Europe, New Zealand, Japan, and what. Of course, we take advantage of the fact that there is a permanent, manned base station at the pole, and these are some of the other experiments I was mentioning to you earlier, the South Pole Telescope, BICEP, and so on. And what is done is to take there this huge bits of machinery, which is actually a 5 megawatt hot water drill. So this is the actual IceCube that you see above ground. We call it the counting house. It's just full of computers. And what we have is a process by which we set up this drill, rather professional drillers set up the drill. Fortunately, physicists don't have anything to do with this because you need professionals to do this. And first you dig a little hole through the fern, the top part of the compacted part of the ice. And then the drill goes in and shoots a jet of hot water, as I said, at 5 megawatt, and drills down 2.5 kilometers, right? And when it is finished, there is a hole there full of course, the melted water, and that takes about 2 days to freeze up again. But before it does so, you can then take the strings of detectors which have been waiting there and already pre-tested, and you lower them down into that hole, and then you just wait for the whole thing to freeze up around it. So you finally then have an experiment where you have all these detectors in the ice. And by the way, 98% of them are still functioning. Okay, so once they're in and once they're working, that's it. So what happens now is that when a neutrino comes in, just as in the Subir Sarkar detector, it creates a muon neutrino, creates a muon, and the muon is traveling faster than the speed of light in the ice, right? So it generates Cherenkov radiation because it's like a shock wave in light, and the Cherenkov angle is determined by the refractive index of the material, the ratio of the speed of light in the medium to that in vacuum. And we have all these, this is a little blow up of that region. It's showing you all these detectors, and you detect these by these optical sensors. And we measure the position, time, and amplitude, and then we reconstruct the tracks. There's a lot of very sophisticated computer methods that go into it, numerical techniques. Now the new rage is machine learning to do this. And you can see that because the muon is going in almost the same direction as the neutrino, the transverse momentum is negligible. It's basically coming from the same direction. So in fact, we can do astronomy with this, and that is what IceCube has become famous for. Of course, the neutrinos are, as you see, coming up through the Earth here, because the neutrinos coming up from above are a million times, 10 million times more in number. We are looking in IceCube for the neutrinos that are coming up from extragalactic sources. So somebody is asking in chat why the experiment is done underground. Is because the cosmic ray background is huge. You have to have some way to absorb them. Otherwise, you cannot possibly see the astrophysical signals you're looking for. But the basic process is exactly the same process that creates beta decay of a radioactive nucleus. It's the exchange of a W boson and the transmission of a neutrino into a lepton in the, I mean, the same process will describe radioactivity. Okay, so here is a simulation of an actual event in IceCube. So you see that's the track coming in, and the time corresponds to the color, and the number of photons tells you the energy. So the size of those blobs is telling you how much energy is deposited. And you can see that because this was a muon track, it actually lost very little energy as it went through. And therefore, measuring the total energy of that muon neutrino is kind of challenging. We have to figure it out from much more sophisticated analysis, such as the stochasticity in that energy loss. But we can track the event very, very well to within 0.1 of a degree, and that is how we can also do astronomy with it. Now, I don't want to say much more about IceCube. I want to talk about INO, but one day, this is what INO will be also doing, except that they don't have photomultipliers. They had this RPCs, these flat sheets, which are very good for covering large areas. And in between them, there are these layers of iron. That's where the conversions will take place. But you track in much the same way. The algorithms that are used for doing so are now the same, whether you do it in the CMS detector at CERN, or you do it in IceCube, or you do it in INO, right? And the methods for estimating energy, for determining the angle, et cetera, are all very similar. So this will hopefully address some of the questions that are being asked in the chat box. So these cosmic rays, as I mentioned, create these air showers, and what actually reaches the ground are the muons, because they are relatively long-lived, and of course the atmospheric neutrinos. Now, IceCube has actually measured these neutrinos. In fact, we have the leading measurement now of atmospheric neutrinos up to energies of 100 TeV. The low energy measurements were made largely by the Super Kamiokande experiment I showed you, and also a few other experiments at the Frejus mine in Europe. And Amanda was a precursor of IceCube, a smaller experiment. And we have measured actually both the muon neutrinos and the electron neutrinos, and they are in agreement with the theoretical model for how many neutrinos should be made in the atmosphere, right? And it is this flux that INO will be using, the natural flux of atmospheric neutrinos, which, as you can see, we actually understand pretty well already. But INO will be using it as the beam, a natural beam. It's on 24 hours, nobody switches it off. Of course, by the same token, you don't have any control over it, but it provides you a natural laboratory to do this experiment. Now, there are other things that IceCube is occupied with. This is an old plot. This is showing our first detection of cosmic neutrinos, which are coming from blazars, from black holes in external galaxies, sweeping up matter and emitting jets, which are pointing towards us. But that's another talk. I won't talk about that here. So you also asked me to say something about neutrino oscillations, and I see that we have already been going on for a whole hour, so I think I'll need to speed up a little bit, if you don't mind. Now, this, as I said, is a topic in itself. I cannot at all do it justice, but I just wanted to give an indication to those of you who have done physics as to how tractable this is. So effectively, if neutrinos have mass, then it means that the eigenstates that propagate, in the Hamiltonian, they are not necessarily the same as the eigenstates of the weak interaction, the ones that are coupled to this electron, muon, and tau. You remember there were these neutrinos in the same families. So the particles that propagate are a superposition. So it's a 3 by 3 matrix. There are 3 eigenstates of the weak interaction. There are 3 mass eigenstates. So to connect a 3 by 3, a row with 3 entries with a column with 3 entries, you know you need a 3 cross 3 matrix. And that's just the rotation matrix in 3 dimensions, right? And there are therefore all these angles that will characterize it. And I've just written the same thing here in more compact notation, which can look frightening if you are not a physicist, but to a physicist, all this should be familiar, right? The point is that these are quantum mechanical oscillations between flavors, and this shows that they actually have a tiny mass. In more detail, this mixing matrix, which is named after the Japanese theorists who first discussed this, is called the MNS, or Maki Nagakawa Sakata matrix. That can be factorized into 3 parts. One to do with the mixing of the 2 and 3, the mu and the tau neutrinos largely. And then there is also, this is 1 and 3, and then 1 and 2. This has been written in a specific way to make it clear how simple the physics is, or the maths is, when you are discussing just 2 species. And the other important thing is that if you have a 3 by 3 matrix, then you know that it's possible to have a complex phase in it. You cannot rotate it away. And so, in other words, because nature has given us 3 generations, we have the possibility mathematically of accommodating a complex phase, which is what you need for violating charge parity. And thereby, in a local quantum field theory, effectively you have the possibility of violating time symmetry. And that is what is necessary to create a universe which has a disparity between matter and antimatter, starting from a universe that had equal amounts. Okay. So I'm just making this throwaway remarks to kind of get you going. I'm not really explaining what that meant, but just to get you excited that right here in this very simple maths lies hidden some of the biggest secrets of the universe. That is the beauty of this formalism. And this is just telling you that what we try to experimentally measure is the differences of the mass squares of these eigenstates, and the probability that a muon neutrino stays a muon neutrino will be given according to these equations, according to the degree of mixing and important parameter, which is this mass square difference times the divided by the energy, and L is the length scale over which we are studying these oscillations. So for atmospheric neutrinos, we are studying energies, as you saw, of GeV to TeV, and the length scales involved are of order, 50 kilometers in the atmosphere, but it can become several thousand kilometers if you're studying neutrinos from the other side of the Earth. And if you are interested, you can actually, these are animations created using Mathematica, the program, which are in fact there in a Wikipedia article. You can look it up, which shows you how the oscillations take place between electron neutrinos, muon neutrinos in blue, and the tau neutrinos in red. And the bottom line is that today's phenomenology, to summarize a huge body of work, which obviously I cannot in 5 minutes, this mixing matrix between the weak eigenstates and the mass eigenstates can be written as so. And in this description, there are all these parameters which have to be determined by experiment. And here are the parameters that have been measured with their experimental uncertainties. And you see, some of them just have question marks after them. We don't know whether this theta 2-3 mixing is exactly 45 degrees or it is slightly less, or so that is an interesting question. We don't know what this CP violation phase is. We don't actually know which is the lightest neutron. We don't know whether the hierarchy of mass ordering is 1, 2, 3 or 3, 1, 2. Okay, this is an important question because this is relevant to whether we can actually detect neutrino mass directly in an experiment where we look for neutrino-less double beta decay, which is also proposed to be done at INO in due course. So these
Sir,
are
so,
the open questions. Sorry?
yeah, so by these INO experiments and the ice cube experiments, so hopefully these question marks will be
Exactly,
answered.
that's what I'm coming to. Now, I see there's a question in the chat box that says this math doesn't look very simple to me. And indeed, it is not simple. It doesn't have to be simple. Okay, it is up to you to learn enough maths to understand this, right? That is, we should be grateful to nature that things can be described in mathematics at all. It is not up to nature to make it like 1 plus 1 equal to 2 for us, right? And let us remember that even 1 plus 1 equal to 2 was difficult at one time. We have successfully got over that. Matrices we have learned about already 100 years ago. Then we learned about tensors. Every time there is a major development in physics, we have to learn more maths. Or rather, we have to find another way in which we can understand the language in which nature has expressed herself. This is a fact. This is not something that we can, as I said, we have to be grateful that this is the case. We cannot, we cannot protest about it because this is what nature is. So these many open questions is exactly as you said is what INO was supposed to answer. And this is the first project report where I just want to point out two things about it. One is that the site that was proposed in the Nilgiris is one of the deepest sites in the world. It was already much deeper than the Kamioga mine or the Sudan mine in Minnesota, where was a similar experiment which had been built to study proton decay. And in fact, KGF was actually the deepest, much deeper. And also, this plot here shows that in principle, a detector like that could be used as the far detector if you shoot a beam of neutrinos towards it from any of the accelerators in the world at CERN or Fermilab or in Japan, such that they propagate through the Earth over different distances. And this is also a way of studying neutrino oscillations in matter, which in principle, as you can see, also probes different parts of the Earth. And actually, in principle, you can actually learn a lot about the inside of the Earth from such experiments in principle. Now, INO will indeed address all these question marks. And in fact, here is a paper that they put out in 2017, published by in Pramana by the Indian Academy of Sciences. So those of you who are interested can, in fact, look at this paper. I think it's like 70 pages long to determine all the things that INO will do. But briefly, this is a nice logo that was put together by Professor Amul Dighe, TIFR. It kind of shows you that INO actually is not just about doing one thing. It, of course, addresses all these questions about neutrinos, neutrino properties, but it can also, as I said, detect Earth matter effects in principle. It can search for new physics beyond neutrinos, right? It can look for magnetic monopoles, long-lived particles. It can serve as a long-term monitor for atmospheric phenomena. You may be interested to know that the rate of muons that you detect in ice cube is actually correlated with the temperature of the upper ionosphere, because that's where the muons are being made. And when the people who study global warming got to know that, they were very excited because they have no way of measuring the temperature, getting that kind of information input for their atmosphere models. And it is amazing that an experiment 2 kilometers underground can actually measure something that is happening at the top of the atmosphere, right? It's only when you build these experiments that you understand these things. More recently in Uti, a muon detector, which is part of the cosmic ray laboratory there, was able to detect energetic particles made in thunderstorms. It could detect a break in the Earth's magnetic field, which allowed a solar storm to disrupt electrical communications on Earth. So, some of the applications of these experiments only become evident after you have built them. They are not part of the original proposal. And as is mentioned here, and I said earlier, you can also do further experiments like double beta decay to look for neutrino mass, dark matter searches. And most of all, this is basically a framework where you can do detector development, train people, bring in collaborators from all over the world, put India on the international map. Right, there was a question? Sorry, did you ask something?
Yes, sir. So there's one on YouTube. There's one from YouTube. The person's asking how do you distinguish muon neutrino from tau neutrino, the interaction?
Okay,
So
so the thing has to do with what I said earlier. The tau neutrino is 2 GeV in mass. Sorry, the tau no, the tau lepton is 2 GeV in mass. So when the neutrino makes its corresponding charge lepton, the leptons have very different masses. The electron neutrino makes an electron, the muon neutrino makes a muon, tau neutrino makes a tau lepton. The tau lepton itself is unstable. It will decay after a little while. It will decay hadronically, a large fraction of the time. So you'll get what we call a dumbbell event. In fact, you have seen this uh, tau neutrino events very recently in Ice Cube. There is a paper just coming out about it. Right? I see there is also a question, why are there so many authors for this paper? Well, that's because India is lucky enough to have a very large number of neutrino phenomenologists. It is an area in which, in fact, we are world leading. There is a lot of theorists who study the phenomenon of neutrino oscillations, neutrino mass generation, neutrino phenomenology. And that is why the science case for was put together in collaboration between experimentalists on this and theorists in a very coherent way. And we therefore are very certain that the science goals that INO is designed to tackle, we know exactly how relevant they are at any given time, right? But I encourage you to look at this 79-page paper to try to get a sense of some of the things that we'll do. Okay, now I've already gone a bit over time. May I take another 10, 15 minutes?
Sure,
10
sir.
minutes? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
So now I'll switch to some of the issues to do with INO. So far I've told you why it's a great experiment, why it's worth doing, and how it will be, in fact, world leading in answering the questions that it has set out to do. But not everybody in India agrees. So it was first proposed at a site near Rutagamand. There was a letter, for example, written to Science magazine by Priya Davidar, and she spells out that this will be an increase in the human population. It will further habitat destruction, and transporting all this construction material will require lots of truck trips towards a protected area. It would require so much water and drain a drought-prone region. And the environmental impact assessment was not based on scientific data and is seriously flawed, right? So these are serious charges, and it is being made, after all, by a colleague, an academic colleague in India at Pondicherry University, right? And she has cited the concerns that they're talking about here. So these are things that need to be taken seriously, and in fact, they were taken seriously. And we have here the reply that was made on behalf of the collaboration by the spokesperson. And what he points out is that this is actually not in the wildlife sanctuary at all. It is, in fact, quite a distance from the boundary. It is in the buffer zone, but it is not actually in any wildlife sanctuary. And that it is, in fact, underground, and it's accessed by a long tunnel. And most of the researchers will be located, at the time it was supposed to be in Mysore. They would not actually be at the site itself. Maybe at most 30 people will be near the site. So it will not, so those concerns are baseless, that it is somehow going to overcome the whole region. And more importantly, that all this digging out had been thought out such that there would be no more than 6 round trips per day over 7 years on the access route, which indeed runs through a so-called elephant corridor that connects Mudumalai to Satyamangalam. And I know that area. A friend of mine has a farm there, and he spends most of his time keeping the elephants out of his farm. Okay. And the water requirement is negligible. In fact, there is a huge hydroelectric power project there. So all these concerns that were highlighted in this letter were baseless. And nevertheless, the environment minister at the time decided not to permit construction, uh, even though he had actually consulted an ecologist at Indian Institute of Science, who was a veteran, who had worked in the Nilgiris for a long time, and had prepared for him a note, and he made this public. And it stated that arguments against Singara are, to a very large extent, exaggerated and misplaced. Okay, so make of that what you will. Nevertheless, there was no framework in which this issue could be discussed in an objective and fair manner, addressing the concerns raised. People had genuine concerns. It is, after all, a forested area. It is a wildlife area. But it is not that the INO people were not aware of these things and they had not thought about how to address them. Anyway, this because of this, the site was rejected. It was taken note of by the international media, And the INO people decided, okay, this is the government's decision. They identified a new site in the Bodi Hills, south of there in Theni, which is, relatively barren. There's no forest. And the operation site would not be in Mysore, it would be in Madurai. And this project was granted clearance in 2010, right? So finally, things were looking up. In 2012, the project was in full swing. Here is a long article in Physics World on the project in India. Around that time, in fact, I happened to be visiting Tata Institute with the Vice Chancellor of Oxford University. Here is he's being shown the INO lab, where there was a little prototype which is out of sight here, and Mondol is explaining to him what the detector is about. But there was environment reared its head again, but from an unexpected quarter. It came from this MP, okay, and he says establishing a laboratory would mean destruction of natural resources. In fact, he also raised fears about neutrinos creating radioactivity and damage. He said, "I will not let a single neutrino enter Tamil Nadu." This was his public quote. And nevertheless, the INO people were ready to meet him, as it says here in this article from the Hindu. But there was also a challenge from an environmental group, which was based in Chennai. And they, in fact, challenged this in the court. And although there was a very interesting article in The Wire, a detailed article, which pointed out that this chap who claimed that he was neutral in the matter, nevertheless equated INO in the same breath with nuclear weapons, in the sense that the same kind of scientist had built nuclear weapons. That immediately tells us that perhaps he was not being entirely objective in the matter, having any understanding of the history of science to conflate these completely unconnected issues. But this article that I'm mentioning, I think, was the first time I'd actually seen a very detailed, thought-out article in the media about it. And as it summarizes here, scientific facts have failed to quell misinformation. An assertion of democratic rights has failed to inspire trust, and the environmental impact assessment has failed as an instrument of legitimization, right? So these are three very serious charges, not against INO, but against the system that we operate in a democracy that we are proud of. That ultimately it's come down to the villagers in the neighborhood being told by politicians or by environmental groups that what is being done is dangerous and a threat to them, and they're not having the ability or the tools to assess in a coherent way what it really means for them and what it means for the world, right? So INO, of course, has mounted a outreach program, and here you see a lecture being given to the villagers about the project. But perhaps this was overcome by the propaganda coming from the other side. So here is a timeline of events. I won't go through it in detail. This is just for the record. You can look it up if you want to see the history of opposition after opposition that was raised on all kinds of species issues, radiological issues, environmental issues. People thought that iron would be used for storing radioactive waste. People thought that neutrinos would be beamed towards it from other places in the world, and that would cause radioactive, damage. And but the main thrust was always about the fact that it would cause damage to the environment. It would cause destabilization of the whole mountain. It's in a seismic zone, and so on, so on. So, and it was this story has been carrying on since then. So, this timeline I have ended at 2018, where this BICO started actually organizing rallies to create awareness of these hazards. And at this time, many scientists in India wrote a letter to the Prime Minister, which I'm making public here, because, scientists have nothing to hide. We believe in transparency. We believe in putting our cards on the table. And this may be too small for you to read, but again, I'm including it in the slide so you can look at it later. And as it says here, already before the experiment had even started, as many as 39 research students have already been awarded a PhD under INO. These were the people who were going to be employed on INO to build the detector. It's a bit like BRC training school turned out the people who went on to construct many of the infrastructures that are now making India self-sufficient in many ways. And this had been foreseen from the very beginning. And yet, this whole project signed by so many people, scientists in India from all the laboratories, universities, this did have some impact, we believe, because finally environmental clearance was granted by the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. This was on 26 March 2018. I've highlighted the important paragraph in the long letter. This again is public. You will find it on the INO webpage that they have recommended the project for grant of environmental clearance. Okay. And all the national science academies, all three of them together issued a statement saying that they appeal to the people of the district, state, and country to support this educational and research project, because a successful INO experiment will be a major technological and scientific national achievement, right? But in spite of this, there is still opposition, and I have put for you here some of the quotes of some of the comments which were left in an article that appeared in the Times of India. And so Mr. G. Sekar says, okay, scientists, keep the scientific issues with you. What the people of TN will get out of it? What about the employment potential? Will the scientific community assure guaranteed 100% reservation for Tamil Nadu natives? And then Mr. Marvan says, INO at Bodi is aimed at destabilizing Mullai Periyar Dam. Clearly, he knows something that all the experts and advisors to the government don't know. Mr. Marvan says, why dump this project in TN? We simply don't want this project. We don't have sufficient water. So these are all self-styled experts. They know more about it than the experts do. In whose payroll do they exist? This chap is even suggesting that all these three science academics are in our pockets. And only one out of these 5 comments is actually supportive. Okay. So, I mean, I don't want to labor the point, but this is actually the case all through the articles I've looked through. So even though INO is backed not by just the national community, but also by the international community, and some of us put together this video, which has interviews with all the Nobel laureates and other people running neutrino experiments all over the world to say that neutrinos don't cause any harm. The project does not have any negative impact that we are aware of. All the issues that people are concerned about have been carefully looked at and assessed, and appropriate clearance has been obtained. But observe this, we put this up in 2018, it's now 2 years later, it has had just over 1,000 views. There is a picture of a dancing dog on YouTube that has had 4 million views. So maybe we are missing a trick there, okay? Now, the case is now before the Supreme Court because that environmental clearance that was granted has been challenged. And in fact, the case is due to be heard, I believe, on the 11th of January. So it ain't over yet. This is still running. Now, we are hoping, of course, for a good outcome because finally, we have not only the support of the international community and the Indian community, but also people are prepared to be outspoken about it. Sandeep Trivedi, who was the director of the IFR until recently, and he's a string theorist, right? He's not a neutrino physicist. He put it very succinctly that if we don't start on this project that's already been delayed by so many years, but if we don't start right away, then after a year, other competitors will be ahead of us, and there is no second prize for discovery in science. Okay, and this has been a non-starter for years. China has begun construction of its own Neutrino Observatory, right? And that is going to be completed by 2022. And then in the pipeline is Hyper K and Dune, which are long baseline experiments in Japan and the USA. And that INO has slipped behind all of these because of these difficulties that have been created, which have nothing to do with the scientific aspects of the project. They're entirely political and misguided, right? Because the concerns may have been genuine, but what was not satisfactory is that these concerns could not be alleviated by providing facts to answer them, right? But I like what Sandeep says at the end, that we still have an edge over others, and this detector technology is, worth pursuing. It's a great experiment, but there is a sting in the tail. He says the fact that scientists fail to convince the public and explain effectively the importance of the project is a shocking failure. Now, Sandeep is not just talking about the INO scientists; he's talking about the entire scientific community. Okay, because you might think that it is our responsibility to convince the public of why this project is important to us. So I would like to end there, and I would like to bring up the following issues for discussion. So what went wrong? I've given you some facts, but that may not be the real reasons why things went wrong. Real question is what can be done now? What lessons can we draw for the future? And this is something that I want to kind of throw back in response to Sandeep's question. Is public outreach our responsibility alone? I mean, after all, we do a difficult day job already. We have to train for years and years to be expert at what we are doing, to do it capably and do it competently. Is it also my duty to go and explain to villagers who have not even had basic science, and some of them even have not had basic literacy? How am I supposed to explain to them the importance of a neutrino project, right? In other words, is it my responsibility alone to carry the can for the whole nature of the reality on the ground in a complex landscape like India? And in particular, what should be the role of the media in this be? Apart from one or two articles that I mentioned in the Wire, I really haven't seen any critical reporting of this issue in the newspapers. The important thing which I'm particularly interested in, because at one time I also worked for an NGO dealing with science education and outreach in Madhya Pradesh. There is an outfit called Eklavya, and the name itself should tell you what our philosophy was. That we believe that you cannot have participatory democracy without basic education. And of course, this is particularly important when you deal with complex scientific questions such as this. And not just this, you know perfectly well in the rest of the world, the same questions arise about global warming and the role of man-made contributions to that. And more recently, we have all heard about all the conspiracies regarding the coronavirus and how it is being dealt with by government, civil rights, and the rest of it. Right? These are very deep questions. As an aside, I might also say that we should also think about whether, if INO does not go ahead, how will this affect our status on the international stage on which we want to compete with the best on a level playing ground. So I think I will stop there, and I'll invite you to lead the discussion. I'm sorry I've taken, I think, is it over an hour more than I said? Never mind. I hope you have time to continue the discussion.
Yes, sir. Yeah. So, uh, my basic uh, question here is, so if a person is educated, if a person is literate, then it is possible to make that person understand. Okay, ये होगा, उसके बाद ये होगा, and then we do this. But then in this case, for example, where people don't even have the basic understanding of things, how is it put in front of them? As in when the people went for outreach, when the scientists went for outreach in the uh, to the villages, how was it put out in front of them? So I'm
Yeah, that's a good question.
interested in that.
I would not know the answer to that because I was not involved in doing that. And of course, it had to be conducted in Tamil, that already
Yeah.
uh, cut out most of us. But I think Professor Rajshekharan might be able to answer that. He was involved in some of these programs. Rajaji, may I invite you to comment on that?
Excuse me, I did not hear him properly. Can you repeat the question, please? Please repeat the question.
Okay, I'll repeat it briefly.
Ah,
So Chandrasekhar was asking,
yeah,
when you went out and you talked to the villagers, you addressed them in Tamil and you tried to tell them about the INO project to
yeah,
dispel the misunderstandings about it.
yeah.
And so Chandrasekhar, please repeat your precise question then in that
Yes,
context.
sir. So for a person with almost zero education regarding not only physics but regarding most of the things, how would you put out these ideas in front of them? As in, I mean, clearly when you start off, they're already completely polarized to one side. So how do you, what do you do, on what cards do you play in some sense to to get to get them?
Shall I answer that? The
Please.
Yes,
only
yes.
thing I said to the villagers when I was talking to the villagers in Tamil was the following. I said, if the central government announces tomorrow that they are going to construct an IIT near your village, will you oppose it? INO is like a IIT, a research institution. It is not going to manufacture anything or make profit. It is for a purely educational institution where your children, your grandchildren also will gain. So when IIT is proposed in your region, you will welcome it with open hands, with garlands. That is what you should do for INO. When I said this, in fact, most of the people in that meeting immediately turned their mind and they supported INO. So like that, in every meeting, if we say the proper thing, villagers are all supportive. But these other guys, these politicians and semi-environmentalists, they come and they spend more time. In fact, one mistake which I know people have been doing, I have been saying this openly, our outreach program should be 100 times more than what we have been doing. One Rajashekharan, one Murthy, one Indumati is not enough. There should be hundreds of them. How do we do that? We can do that through the local students. That's what I have been advocating now. We have to make a local army of students from local colleges and schools who will be there constantly every week. When Vaiko talks in one meeting, these fellows will go and talk in 10 meetings. That is the only way this can be fought.
I think you're absolutely right,
I,
Rajaji.
I will
I
not
just,
say that the villagers are against it.
yeah.
Whenever the villagers hear me, they always get convinced that INO is good for them. There's no doubt about it. But these other people who have nothing to do with that region, they come for their own reasons. God only knows what it is. They turn their minds. So how do we oppose it? By having an army 10 times more than these politicians. That is the only way.
Yes, I just want to add to that, Rajaji, that as you say, the army has to be constituted of students in colleges and
Correct.
schools and so on, because the people actually working on INO themselves, they are busy enough doing
Not do it.
their specialized work.
Yeah.
So it is too much of a burden, I feel, to
Yeah.
place on those who are directly involved with the
Yeah,
project.
exactly.
They should also find time to go out and do outreach. I mean, and I say that as somebody who does outreach myself.
Yeah.
I'm saying that it is too much of a responsibility for the protagonists, but they should in turn, as you say, create a larger task force of people who don't have to be expert on every aspect of the experiment, but to convey the basic science that
Yeah.
is necessary. Yeah, thanks.
Also, the INO will benefit students, future students,
Correct.
especially
Correct.
students from that region, Theni district and Madurai district. So
Yes.
students should tell the politicians, you stand
Yes.
up. You are
Yes.
standing against the progress of our future. So you
Yes.
should just stand away from our path. So it is the students, because
Yes.
it is the students who are going to lose if INO does
Indeed.
not come. So
Indeed.
it's
Indeed.
the students' responsibility to convince
Yeah. Yeah.
everybody that INO is good for them, so it should come.
And there's a question in the chat box that says, wasn't involving the local media and convincing them first a better option? They may cover a larger audience. And indeed, as Vivek has replied, President Kalam, past President Kalam, he actually wrote articles on INO in large circulation Tamil newspapers. They may not have been the regional paper, right? And this is a much more complex question. We had the same issue when I was working for Eclavia. Uh, uh, Regional newspapers don't have any science editors. They don't have any, they hardly have an editor, right? We actually set up a news service called Shroth, which was meant to provide factual information on science projects to local newspapers who cannot afford to have a science editor, but then they have to subscribe to the service. In fact, that was funded by the government of India. But what we are doing was mainly in North India, right? We are reaching about 300 newspapers. but South India also needs an equivalent, because it is true that most of the discussion about these things happens for an urban population in the cities. It doesn't reach the villages, right? And
Subir.
they quite understandably have other concerns.
So, Subir, I
Yeah,
think, Subir, can I make a comment here?
please, now.
So this is actually because this is a mixed crowd here. I mean, there are physicists, there are chemists, there are biologists.
Yes.
And for I think it is got to be understood that maybe people are thinking that, oh, there is a neutrino experiment, what is there for us? In fact, you should also remember that this is underground laboratory. What we have projected that neutrino experiment is only first stage. You can do material science there. You can do biology experiment there, which need low, cosmic ray background, how these, cultured and other things happen. Now the materials are special materials are developed. So if underground, see what we are trying to create an underground facility. And of course, INO is a flagship experiment which will be done there first. But this whole, once you create such an underground laboratory, it will be used for other purposes where low background environment is required.
Yes, quite right. And indeed, that is something that also perhaps was not obvious, that the fact that this could be a broader facility than simply for particle physics. It was not really obvious from the very beginning to the community.
Yeah, although it is called the INO, neutrino name is there.
Yes.
Actually, the plan is to create an underground laboratory which
Yes.
will exist and function for the next 50 years, if not 100 years.
Yes.
So neutrino is, as Naba put it, is only the first step, but many other experiments can be done, and it will be a fantastic underground facility for the whole country for the next 50 or 100 years.
Okay, Chandrasekhar, move on to the next question then, please.
So I have a question which is related to this. So it's a little personal in the sense that I am from Chennai.
Yeah.
And I used to defend INO back when I was in school, and till this date I do. So what ends up happening when I start doing this is that they start to, question my intents, like how Subir sir showed some of the opinions that were in Times of India.
Yeah.
They start kind of attacking you personally. This is not just for on defense of INO. When scientists start defending some of their work, the normal people start accusing us of, you don't care about the public and you don't care about the local people here. You only care about the science. So and it also kind of tends to go a little more personal if they knew the person. So
you're absolutely right. I mean, this is something that we are witnessing in other contexts as well. I mean, right now,
how should one go about dealing with those things?
Well, I mean, I don't have the answer to that. This is something that all of us have to think about. But you're right that at the same time that you have become a much more dependent on technology society, all of us, the people who are making those negative remarks are using the World Wide Web. They're using personal computers. They're using mobile phones. They're using the fruits of the technology that have been created by the science that they are objecting to, right? And they don't even see that contradiction themselves. That's what makes me, of course, wonder about their the level of their
hypocrisy.
That they don't actually understand that, in fact, the what they're objecting to is undermined by the fact that they are themselves benefiting from it. But leaving that aside,
I would say they understand.
Okay, maybe they understand. They're doing it deliberately. So then the question is where that's a good point. Maybe they do understand. So where is that resentment coming from? Now, I'm not a psychologist. I don't want to engage in cord psychobabble, but it is quite clear that people in general feel threatened when they see any body or group that is kind of consistent and sure of itself. This is a natural tendency in us, right? For that matter, I see it even in academia. You can see that between different subject groups in academia. There is some degree of suspicion or even concern about how can you be so sure. I mean, science in particular. So in the humanities, there has been a huge change in the last sort of decades, that what was taken to be certain in the days of colonialism and empire has come under scrutiny. And we have come to realize that many of those things which were presented as fact are actually cultural constructs. They were created by the ruling sort of civilizations of the time, and they kind of uh, dismissed everything that was not part of what they had created as uncivilized or barbaric or whatever. So people in the humanities are very sensitive now to the idea that we construct these things. We don't, there are many of those categories are actually baseless. But at the same time, they find it hard to understand that in science there are some absolutes. Okay, gravity is not a cultural construct. It actually exists. That's why we are all pinned down to the earth. It's not something that I constructed. It was not done just by, it's not a white person's construct. Gravity is a physical phenomenon. Now, of course, it is not to say that there is no bias in cultural bias in the sciences. There is, but it's at a much more subtle level. It is not this kind of obvious thing. But what I was saying was that my impression is that there is this kind of suspicion because, especially because physics has been so successful in actually determining things and making progress, right? We think it is progress, right? The word progress is itself a bit of a suspicious word in several domains of the humanities. People would say, by what token are you gauging progress? Who is saying that there is progress? Progress for whom, right? But we know that when I say that we have determined the, I don't know, the CP violation phase in the MNS mixing matrix, that's not a statement about any particular race or culture or gender or whatever. It's immaterial, right? It's a fact of nature, right? And this is something that I find culturally very hard to transmit. And it creates this suspicion because people don't understand what you're on about. So I suspect, Tarun, that the kind of thing that you came across was partly because the people who are saying that are intelligent people, but they have never made the effort to actually study science as we are all doing, right? And you know how long it takes to do that, how much effort you make. And even after making all that effort, you have just got to the bottom rung of the ladder. There is a lot more to go. And even when you have spent the whole of your lifetime doing it, you still may not have made any major changes to the fabric. You may not have discovered quantum gravity. You may not have done anything outstanding. We do it because for us it's the path that is important. It is that process that is important. Okay, the journey is the reward. That is why we do it. And I suspect that this is something that we have to convey, that science is about culture. It is not just about discovering phenomena or inventing new things. It's about a whole way of looking at the world, and a way of looking at the world that I believe is particularly relevant to today's world, because we can show by pointing to, I don't know, look at CERN, for example. In today's divided world with its political squabbles and people at each other's throats, you actually have a international organization that is working, right? Where Israelis and Palestinians work together, right? This was the place where during the Cold War, people from the Soviet Union, this was the only place where they could come and talk to their Western counterparts, right? So science as a means of promoting international harmony is something that is not been as widely recognized as I think it should be. And places like INO, what are we doing at INO? We are doing science. It's part of a global cultural activity. It is not something that is Indian. We are not doing Indian science, right? Just as in Oxford, I'm not doing British science. We are doing science, period, right? And we really must find some way to communicate this lesson, because otherwise there will always be this hostility, as if we are from some other planet and we talk a language that nobody understands, and therefore we must be up to something. I'm sorry, that was maybe not the answer you're looking for, but I mean, that's how I feel about it personally.
Yeah, so just one more this thing. So Samit is asking because so we have had previous projects also before, like the GM, even nuclear power plants like Kud and Kulam. So there was resistance then too, right? So was the resistance in the INO project kind of anticipated in some sense? Because
I think should have anticipated, I would say. I think we actually didn't realize, actually it is actually you have raised a point. Why these people are started with when against INO? And if you look at the people who are against INO are also against Kudankulam, actually to begin with. And they see this was a DAE project, Department of Atomic Energy.
Exactly.
That was, and then according to them, the DAE is involved in making reactors, so and
Yes.
which is bad and so on. So that is a different question when reactors are bad or not. I mean, this question should be answered very clearly to them. That what is safety of reactors is much higher than any other powers and all those things. So, but I think that was we should have realized that. I would say that that is a linkage. So we should have at the beginning, very early stage, try to say or put that Department of Atomic Energy do make reactors, which we, of course, we should be able to support that as a scientific, reason that reactors are needed for India. But even without that, what they also support basic science, and you could have listed what are the basic sciences projects that DAE is supporting.
Yes.
So that this stigma that Department of Atomic Energy is only doing nuclear reactors is probably the one of the reason for this group of people that we see the names actually Subir was pointing out is actually responsible. They're also same people who oppose it. Actually, Subir pointed that out, that these are the same people who opposes the Kudum Kular project. And that's true.
As you say, the fact that, historically DAE was the place where, this BRC training school was set up. This was, Bhava was farsighted enough to understand the importance of training people at the cutting edge of science. And they have been responsible not just for building reactors, but, ECIL, TIFR itself is a institution which does pure science and mathematics. It is supported by the DAE. Okay. And of course, this association of the DAE has also affected even scientists from TIFR in the past. I remember, Novo, you would remember when you were working on the D0 experiment at Fermilab, and they could not, they were banned from going to the US after India carried out nuclear tests in Pokhran. So
yes.
So this is important, but the fact is that it is unfortunate that the DAE has such a poor public image. And I was particularly struck by this when, along with the Saha Institute people who wanted to set up a dark matter investigation experiment in the Jadugura mine, I went there with the first group to go there. And before I went there, I looked on the internet to see, learn about Jadugura. And I found the place painted in the most dire terms. There were any number of articles that said, oh, these villagers there are all being poisoned by radioactivity, and they're all exploited and sent down into the mines, and they are exposed to radiation, and they're, I was prepared for a horrific sight. The reality, I can tell you, and I do think I was objective in the matter, was nothing at all like what I had been led to believe. Right?
So in that connection, actually, I was trying, for example, when earlier chairman, Kakotkar was chairman, we are trying to tell that, DAE also need to go all out for each project. Forget about iron. I'm not talking about iron. Even nuclear reactor. There should be collaboration with academicians, students. They should go out and give talks. Why it is safe, and why India need atomic energy for the next 30 years or so. I mean, these have to be transparently done. And somehow that is missing in some of our departments. So that is another reason for.
Actually, if I may say in that context, when at Jadugura, we at dinner, the mine, the director of the mine was very hospitable towards us, and he gave us a nice dinner. And I was chatting to him, and I said, look, I've been looking on the web, and I see that there are all these reports about how, which bear no relation at all to the reality. Why don't you have a FAQ on your web page, right? Answering the charges that are made against you. And look, I don't want to I didn't want to mention individuals, but this is what, I will not name the person, but this is what he told. He said, these people are total ignoramuses. How can you even talk to them? Look at what they're saying. It makes no sense at all. And I don't want to engage in a dialogue with, idiots like that. Now, I could understand where he was coming from a personal level. I mean, the chap is a scientist and he quite obviously feels really angry that, some guy from Japan, a Japanese doctor, had actually written without ever visiting
Yes,
Jaduguda,
yes, I know that
entirely
article.
on the, entirely on the basis of second-hand information, something which is factually wrong, right? And this guy was angry about that. But then I thought to myself, but the, in the end, the people that are reading these things on the web, these are the people who are the voters of this country. These are we live in a democracy. We are proud of being in a democracy. These are the people who vote for the government. These are the people who pay the taxes that support all these projects. However maddening, however frustrating, however annoying these objections are, you have to face up to it. You have to address them. You cannot just
Absolutely.
say, I'm above all this, I have no time for dealing with these idiots, I'm just going to go and do my work, because they will shut you down. Okay, they will close you down if you don't pay attention to them. So if just for self-preservation, but of course, what Nobo is saying is beyond that. It's not just for our own self-preservation. It's because if we really believe that we are progressing knowledge and creating a better India by doing all this stuff,
We should be able to
the
explain.
science, then we have to carry everybody with us. We
Yes.
cannot afford to say these people, they can go their own way. If they don't want to be scientific, that's their problem.
So I
Okay.
think this is the main message. Actually, one can say to the students today that each of you forget about this project, about science as such, to the common people. We have to link them up. That's why it is important to do science research. They should understand, because it is their money we are spending, and they have to understand. You can't say that you don't understand all those mathematics and all those things. That's a different question. But you have to, in your language, explain to each of these Indians that why it is important to support science for any. I mean, forget about it is not only INO. It is everything, everywhere. What we do is important.
No, I understand all these argument, but I do not understand. Let's say that our Masanaguri earlier, this elephant corridor, it will, because of elephant corridor, you cannot make this. What argument you will give against them? Where this, we are, as Shubidya says, that only 7 track is going, there is 1,000 of trucks moving on in that road. They mentioned 7 track is going, that's why you are stopped.
So
What
Govinda,
sort of argument we should give with those
Govinda,
people?
the point is, these guys are also like us. We are few. Those guys who are making that kind of arguments are completely, they are against. They are these activists. They are so-called. They have their own ulterior motive, like the politicians. There are these activists. But I'm not talking to address them. But I'm talking to address a large number of people
Ordinary
who
people.
are not,
Ordinary people.
yes,
Yes.
ordinary people.
Yes. I think
That's agree.
that is important.
We should talk with the ordinary people. But the point, who knew intentionally did the things. If you argue them today one answer, tomorrow they will come out with this 10 paraphrase on that. You have to answer 10. Tomorrow you have to go 100 of them.
So don't go with them. That's the point. See, they have to see. For example, it works. Politicians sometimes they're good politicians. They're not so good politicians. When this in Kerala, the ex-chief minister was against INO, we could immediately talk to him and explain to him, and he understood, and he
Yes.
never afterwards opposes anything. But there was another politician in Tamil Nadu whom we were mentioning, Mr. Baiko, as Subir said, we tried to meet him. Professor Raj Sekaran tried to meet him. I appealed to him that we will meet you anywhere. But he actually avoided even meeting us, because he knew that he is not doing just for the opposition. He has an ulterior motive why he is opposing. So we will not gain much to go to them, because they will always oppose. But there are people in Tamil Nadu, in those Vattipuram village and other areas. It is through the students, as Govinda was trying to do now, reach out to the students, as Rajaji is talking about. Those students talk to the local, because they're coming from those villages, maybe some of them, those students. If they can understand, then they can explain to their parents that no, this is what they're doing is something for good. So that is only way. I mean, it is a very uphill task, but I don't see any alternative.
Okay. So when you are mentioning my thing, I'm just telling you this or other audience also. Uh, I am trying to reach out all the Theni and Madurai local colleges. I went few colleges and I talked with about 30 college teachers in the local area.
Mhm.
My plan is that I will give them a small lab setup.
Mhm.
First, we will have a workshop in Madurai, and most of the places they do not have the lab. So I will start with that. We'll give the small electronics lab setup to those people, and I told them gradually, means people in Madurai they will go there, and if required we will train more and more. That is the way I want to reach the local people through the college teachers, and first to the student, giving the some of the equipment, and I give some lectures, and we'll go more and more also for that.
Yes.
So if you have some suggestion on that direction, you can give me, maybe I can take it.
Yes. Well, thanks for
In
that. I
fact,
mean, these are clearly things one has learned the hard way, right? I mean, in the sense that, as somebody mentioned earlier, the problem is that all this was not anticipated, that it could be as serious as this, to the extent where a major government-backed project involving the entire Indian scientific community, backed by the international science community, has got all the legal necessary clearances, everything can be stopped by just a handful of people utilizing the system that we have in our country for individual citizens to bring cases in the court, in the public interest, right? Now, whether they're using this or misusing this is for the courts to answer finally. But unfortunately, I know, meanwhile has to pay the price. The point is that
sir,
we have inherited a legal system which is good in principle but very creaky in practice, as everybody knows, and it is quite possible to misuse it to for your own ends without actually having any public interest in mind. But that is a wider question. Sorry, you're saying something, Chandrasekhar?
sir, in fact, Satya sir has raised his hand.
Yeah,
He wants to say something.
yeah,
Satya.
please.
Yeah, I just want to bring in another point of view, like what Subir said, that often it becomes quite tough for scientific community who are actually protagonists of this project
Hmm.
to take dual role of doing science and also trying to convince people with a language that they understand.
Yes.
And intrinsically, this also sets somehow, like what he said, certain suspicion that obviously if you are a protagonist of a project, you will actually say something good about the project, and you will actually say that it doesn't harm either ants or elephants. One way I felt, which sort of somehow didn't happen in case of INO, this is not just because we didn't try, but I want to put this up. Just like any other, infrastructure projects, it could be power, it could be railways, it could be any other thing. In a way, the state government and its machinery, reaching out in their ways, either their media or certain political dynamics using that, able to kind of convince me people doesn't mean that they come to the field that the way we go and do it, but even simple statements by the powers that be would have actually made a big difference both to the people as well as the opposition. So namely, what I meant is, while it is true that the state government did help us by, let us say, giving land for the project, and also sometimes they help, but one probably never heard the Tamil Nadu, for example, government in this case, because it is actually located there, uh, any of these three or four governments coming and saying that this project is something useful to our land, our children, our people there, and the government per se is convinced that this project is useful to us. This statement will go a long way to silence to some extent the opposition, which is actually the main problem today, but also sends through their own machinery and public channels that even the people on street will actually get. Remember, all these in the general administration, the mode of communication is from government down to the people. Okay, of course, there will be opposition, there will be some people, but it is a lot more easy to convince people who have misconceptions than those people who are actually behind this drama to actually mislead people and for their political gains. But unfortunately, you don't see that in the case of INO coming from the government per se. Okay, so if this, just like they do, for example, if the state government wants to do a metro in a city, okay, they'll go out of their way. They will do everything, even try to kind of influence people, sometimes maybe courts and so on and so forth. But in the case of basic science experiment like this, one expects certain support, vocal support in a statement, that the government can give. I think that will also, apart from all that, what Rajaji said, what Prof. Mandal said, and you said, Subir, but this is also one of the dimensions that will make a difference, I feel.
Well, I agree with what you said, but ultimately, I think let's be honest about this. We are professional scientists. We are not lobbyists. We are not trained outreach people. We have a complex job to do already. And if we are focusing on the science, then we don't think like, if I was going to make money out of it, then sure, I would think in terms of how to lobby the people in government, how to lobby the people in power to get my way, right? But the simple truth is that nobody, I mean, in spite of the fact that, how many, crores will be spent on this project, none of that money is for the personal pockets of anybody involved in the project. I think this is the thing that actually is pretty most difficult to get across, that we are really engaged in this experiment uh, simply for the pure intellectual pleasure of doing it. And if indeed we did it for any other reason, then we probably would not succeed in doing it. That is the quid pro quo, right? But because of this, we are also very bad at lobbying and anticipating what kind of problems there might be and so on. And you are quite right that the people in government perhaps have not been as supportive as they should be. But then this is part of a much broader thing that there is general ignorance about science in the in politics and in the civil service. I mean, not in every country, but in most countries, this is the case, including in the UK, I should say, in case anyone thinks this is directed at India, right? Almost all the politicians are people with who don't have any science background, right? And they cannot understand this cultural aspects that I pointed to earlier, which is really why what drives the whole engine. And it is actually rare. I mentioned CERN a couple of times earlier. It was set up after the Second World War by far-sighted people like Isidore Rabi and others, who were European scientists who had to flee to the United States during the war. When they came back, they realized that you needed some really world-leading activity which had no uh, parochial aspect at all in
Combined.
order to actually unite.
Yes.
So he went to UNESCO and he made a famous speech there to motivate why Europe needed something like that, a laboratory. People, I'm sure questions were raised then. People said, would have said, why the hell do you want to do research on subnuclear physics? I mean, all the buildings are shattered, everything is bombed flat out, the whole economy has collapsed. This is the time to do fundamental physics. And Rabi was right. Okay, he actually saw that it was important to have a thing like that. And actually, it may interest you to know that when CERN was first proposed at Geneva, the local canton actually voted against it. They thought it was going to be generating nuclear, because the word nuclear is in the title. They also thought that it was going to, create radioactivity and radiation hazards and stuff like that. Now, that was obviously overturned. It was constructed there. I must say, I don't actually know what was done to do that, whether the local city municipality or the canton actually, I don't know, brought out some information about what would actually be done with for particle physics and how it was different from nuclear reactors. I don't know if that was how it happened, but India is not the only place where there is opposition to scientific projects. Of course, this happens in the most advanced countries in the world, and the US is a particular case in point as well, right? And so we are, of course, we all like to talk about education, etc., but the American population is pretty well educated, you would say, but apparently half of them still believe the earth is flat or believe in aliens and so on, so on. So it's not just about education per se, it's about the right kind of education that we are talking about. So everything, there are more nuanced aspects. We can point at the obvious things, but I think this case brings to mind that the main people who have opposed us, as Nava was saying earlier, are actually educated people. These environmental groups that he's talking about. They are qualified people. They also have degrees. One of the guys that I mentioned, he actually had done. He has a PhD in biodiversity. Right? He did an undergraduate degree in physics. Nevertheless, he opposed it. Now, whether this is because he misunderstood the intentions of the INO scientists, or whether he did not trust them to be able to carry out a project as complex as that without, after all, fair enough, right? I said earlier that we should not be held responsible for the nuclear bomb just because, atomic scientists, nuclear scientists invented, the bomb. The generals did it. The generals took over, right? It was not done by the scientists, but the scientists participated. Okay, and in some sense, all large scientific projects in the world today are fashioned, modeled after the Manhattan Project, in the sense of receiving large set of funds, which you then make a science case for and use as you wish to within your own internal refereeing. So we cannot claim to be entirely independent of or free of the shadow of our past, right? This is something you have to keep in mind. But at the same time, we can look to actual successes, like CERN, for example, in actually overcoming all these past prejudices, biases, misunderstandings, and saying, look, we can actually point towards a better world for everybody. And in the process, discover things like the World Wide Web and so on, which benefit everybody, right? And INO could, this is something that Rohini Godbole, who was one of the people I interviewed for this documentary, said that, and I think Abdul Kalam also said something similar. A place like INO could be like the equivalent of CERN for the region. It could focus international attention on the place. It could provide a center for training and stimulate, most of all, stimulate young minds. That schoolboy sitting in some village school in Tamil Nadu, he will say, look, I can aspire to that. I can aspire to learn enough that I can understand what they're doing in the laboratory, right? We all have been touched by things like that in our own childhood. When you were in school, it was listening to somebody's talk, seeing some picture, being impressed by something that motivated us to pursue what we do. And INO can do the same for millions of people. I don't understand why this message has not got through, because surely it is part of all of our experience. And instead, we are using sophisticated arguments, which are, however, fundamentally baseless, to try to oppose it on environmental grounds. This is the part that I find very, very uncomfortable. Because I am also environmentally conscious. You are also environmentally conscious. None of us want to create a radioactive wasteland and fill it with I don't know, radiate people and kill them. I mean, how can such motives be ascribed to us? This is itself very hurtful, right? And I mentioned that the one of the objections to the Nilgiri, the original site, was that there had been the hydroelectric power project, which is there, had actually during the construction process managed to pollute one of the local rivers by pouring in tons and tons of slurry into it. And this guy who objected to INO was citing that as an example of how things can go wrong, right? So ultimately, it's also a matter of trust. If Novo says that there are only going to be 6 truckloads of garbage of rocks being transported every day through the forest, right? Can we trust him that he can actually do that? Will the scientists in the project have the ultimate control over the logistics, which after all will have to be done by other contractors and people who will have to be brought in, right? So it is clear to me that the trust was missing at the time, right? And it is unfortunate that it was missing because at that time there was only a small number of people opposing. If they had been counted, then we might already have had 10 years of data from INO. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to put it like that. I mean, one should never regret. What happened is what happened, right? We have to move forward. But I do wonder whether this thing that you was discussed earlier, how much was this anticipated, that things had gone slightly differently. It might already have been the case that INO had been successfully operating for 10 years. It was just a cruel twist of fate.
Pratyush had raised her hand.
Yeah.
Yes,
Sorry.
I was actually wanting to make a comment based on what you just said, and also Satya sir had said that um, when we go about the outreach of telling people what INO is, a major part is that how much can people relate to the science that we're doing. So being a biologist, I'm saying that there are many questions in biology or something related to cancer, let's say. People are very easily convinced that, okay, this is going to solve some disease or this is going to help us in this way. While INO has another, or any other basic science question has this another layer of problem that, people are not going to relate to it. Why are you doing this? So they will not care about it enough to even listen to it so that they can be influenced by what we are trying to tell them. Maybe that was another problem that why
That
politicians
is
were
a very
able.
important issue. This is absolutely true, and it is something that very hard to cope with, because I gave some examples of why fundamental research is important and how India has produced many fundamental scientists, but nevertheless this question keeps coming up, and you are quite right that it's kind of hard to explain to people, even other scientists, forget about the lay public, why it is important to do this. I think, as I said, my answer would be at the end, just like when people were asked, why do you climb Mount Everest? Because it is there. Okay, that is ultimately the real answer. It is a challenge to address questions that we do not understand, which are at the limit of our knowledge. This is a challenge, and as intellectuals, as scientists, as people who are just curious about the world, we are naturally motivated to seek out such challenges, right? The question, of course, you can then ask is, why should the government give you 150 crores to do that? But that's a separate question, right?
Yeah.
But fundamentally, you're right. People are puzzled. Why do you want to do something crazy like this?
I think problem is that we also have now people of different kind. If it is years back when Bob Wilson was proposing to build Fermilab, and he went to the US Congress, and all those politicians asked him, so tell Mr. Wilson what this new lab will do for the defense of the country. So he actually answered that by saying, sir, I am sure it will not going to do anything for the defense of the country, but it will make the country worth defending.
Yes, yes.
So
But,
I mean, so
that's absolutely right. Yes.
so and then there is.
So maybe that is the thing.
So it is very difficult. I'll tell you another example. Now I'm giving the example, sir. Now we are saying, see, what is the outcome of CERN? It has given World Wide Web. But think of before World Wide Web was invented at CERN. We could not have told that to the people that what CERN said.
That was not the thing at all. Anyway, it was a byproduct. In fact,
Yes.
CERN itself did not realize what it had got on its hands. I once asked Chris Llewellyn-Smith, my colleague, retired colleague here, he was Director General of CERN at the time. I said, Why did you not make it happen that every browser says in the corner, brought to you by CERN or something? Then people would have got to know that this was actually the creation of particle physicists. He said, the truth is that we didn't even realize what we had actually got. In fact, nobody encouraged, Tim Berners-Lee actually was an undergraduate here at Queen's in physics. And even, they didn't realize what it was, because that was not the purpose. That was not the point, right? We did it for entirely different things. But let me give you another example, Tarun, which is slightly more offbeat. I showed the picture of A.K. Raichaudhuri from Presidency College in Calcutta, right? Now, Amal Raichaudhuri was a relativist. He was basically a teacher. He is best known for all the fantastic students he turned out. But he wrote this classic paper, right? The Raichaudhuri equation. That equation plays a key role in posing the singularity theorem that Roger Penrose and Stephen Hawking did, for which Roger has got the Nobel Prize this year, right? Raichaudhuri obviously did not write his equation for a particular end, right? And the fact that it was used in a crucial context in the Penrose-Hawking proof of the existence of initial singularity happened years later. In fact, Roger was himself unaware that the person who had written down that equation was from Calcutta. When he first visited, he didn't even know it, right? And yet, that result, that 4-page paper in Physical Review, will stand the test of time. It will live, not just for years or decades, it will live for centuries. It is a contribution to the world that everyone can be very, very proud of, including all the people in Calcutta who have never even heard of A.K. Raichaudhuri. He did not do it for fame. He did not do it to be known as the man with the Raichaudhuri equation. He wrote it down because he is a creative person, he's an intellectual, and that's what came to him. Okay. And in the end, we should do science because of that reason and that reason alone, not to invent the World Wide Web or anything else, right? And if people ask why do you do this, then maybe the best way to ask them back in turn is, why do you sing? When you go and have a shower, why do you sing? Are there no fundamental human things that move us to express ourselves, to try to understand the world? Do you have to justify everything in terms of money and achievement and politics and awards? Can we not be just human beings interested in learning about the world? That's what it really comes down to, right?
I think that's the problem with the ordinary people that we were discussing.
Pratyush, I just added one more thing.
Yes, sir.
What Professor Sarkar has mentioned. Okay, if those kind of questions come, you can just tell that X-ray, laser, MRI, all are coming from this kind of fundamental physics.
Yeah.
When people did the research on this topic, they did not think about that this will be so much influence. I can give you a long list of these items which come from this fundamental physics.
Yes.
You can give these examples.
And in fact, most of them are not even known to. I mean, MRI is a good example. You just mentioned it. They took the word N out of, so that, because people get scared of that. But I know people who, actually there's somebody I was interviewing recently who works on image analysis from MRI scanner. And they didn't even know what the actual fundamental physical process was that underlies it, which was, as you say, came out of nuclear magnetic resonance. I mean, it's a standard technique, right? They didn't know about it, because now they think it is something that doctors have invented. they don't even know this, because we are also very bad at publicity, right? As I said, for many years, nobody, even in Oxford, my colleagues in college, they had no idea where the World Wide Web had come from. They thought, people, the the U.S. Secret Services or somebody had invented it. They had no idea it had come out of CERN. And so we don't do very good at doing that. But then I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't think that we should be spending our time just beating our drum and going on about how wonderful we are and we create all these things. Because if we didn't actually love our subject as much as we do and do it for the sake of doing it and for no other reason, then we could not be producing as good stuff as we do. I'm 100% certain of that. It's just like, we should really, I know we are scientists, but we are also poets. A poet does not write poetry necessarily to sort of get an award or medal or be the most hits on YouTube or whatever. They write poetry because it comes something from within them, right? And that sense, I say that we should also make it clear that we have a cultural connection with everybody in the world, even if they don't understand what it is we are doing. I don't understand what somebody is doing if they're playing the piano. I can hear the music, I can appreciate it, but I don't technically understand what they're doing, because it'll take me 15 years to find out. I have to train at least that long to get some appreciation. But can I not relate to their culture without knowing the technical detail? I think we have to focus more on communicating that aspect of what we do to a broader public if you really want to get them on side. Sorry, Vivek, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I mean, I had promised not to utter a word, but maybe
No. Please.
no. Just to continue on another example, to add to what Navo says. There is this famous, I think most of the students here also might know, but some might not. There is this famous, meeting between the then Prime Minister of England, who visited the Royal Society, and Faraday was showing him around, and he showed this, he rotated the coil in the magnetic field and produced EMF, and he said, "What use is this?" And he very plainly replied, he says, "One day you are going to tax it."
Well, that of
That
course,
got him interested, of course.
that is a very good thing to say to a politician.
Yeah. The other thing I would like to say is that, of course, the INO project will, apart from helping students, which is would be a very big contribution, students not just in the local area, but in Tamil Nadu, in the whole of India, and so on, and get them to do sort of hands-on work, to interact with people. But also, there is a lot of engineering component when it comes to building it, and also perhaps when it comes to improving on it at a later stage. So all this is going to be done through Indian involvement, Indian industry. Okay, so all that money, 1,500 crore, I mean, almost all of it is going to go back to our Indian industry.
That's a
That
very
will help
important point.
Indian industry do things which they had never done before on this scale.
Yes.
That's number two. Point number three, of course, is, I agree that we have not been so good at outreach and so on. But I would urge the student community here, and then they, help multiply this process to, talk to people. If there are any difficulties that you have, you please interact with the INO colleagues here. There is a website where there is an FAQ, but you are welcome to interact with the people at INO. Who will, because there might be difficult questions that some of the public might ask.
But
So
Vivek,
they
can I
deserve,
just
of
interrupt?
course, a well thought out reply.
I was going to say, in that context, Vivek, can't you appoint a set of, as Rajaji mentioned this earlier, why can't you have INO ambassadors? Create a cadre, give them a, affiliation, right? People who do outreach and who, as you say, you back up with facts when necessary and so on, and training. Create a whole cadre of INO ambassadors. Rajaji was saying that earlier, that's who need to go out in Tamil Nadu locally. So those are people who have to be Tamil speakers. But you can have INO ambassadors everywhere. They can be people who are writing blogs, writing chats, writing.
No, so now, incidentally, we have some presence, although maybe it's not as much as it perhaps might have been, on Facebook and Twitter. So there are some of our young students who are, bringing out small video clips, small articles, and but again, it's something, it's a cultural thing. Those clips don't get the kind of viewership that, let's say, as you said, a dog dancing gets. But nevertheless, we are trying. But I think this is a very good suggestion, and I'm sure Govindo.
There are people, Vivek. There are people with well-established sort of who have tens of thousands of followers on social media. They are people who form opinion. And some of them are actually quite respected because they are they have credentials. One has to get to them.
Yeah, that's right.
And convince them.
That's a good
and,
point.
and
Yes.
get them to promote, I know, on their platforms, because then their followers also come into contact with it. So,
Incidentally, I forgot to mention one more thing. There's a question on what use is this, and certainly we have no definite uses of the neutrino as of now, other than the fact that it helped in make the sun live for so long, and therefore create life through diversity of biological systems and so on. But it's possible that in the future we might have communication by neutrinos. By the way, I don't know how many, some 1 kilobyte of data or something has already been, a demo has been done from Fermilab to, I think, 750 kilometers away. Who knows, using coherent neutrino scattering and compact accelerators, you might be able to develop a communication system. It may not happen in 10 years. It may happen in 20 years, 30 years.
More immediate.
But there are possibilities. Some things that we thought were impossible, maybe 50 years ago, are happening. I mean, as I think Kaku has mentioned some place, that in 1900, if somebody had said that you will be able to talk to somebody, 10,000 kilometers away with just a small device, he would have been, made a fool of.
So that people have talked about intergalactic communication using neutrinos. I mean, much better than the radio waves.
Or more down to earth, Dobo, you can do tomography of the earth.
Tomography of the earth, yes.
There is a scientific reason that is already there in our list of those things.
Yeah,
exactly. And in fact,
I'm sure there will be things that we cannot even think of right now.
Yes.
They come up as things go on. As I said, the World Wide Web was not thought of by the CERN authorities.
So everywhere you go through that one, why is it all forgotten? I just tell you why Kamiokande was detector was built. It was built not for neutrino physics at all.
Exactly.
It was built for proton decay.
Exactly.
And then they didn't see proton decay, but they did see neutrino oscillation. So
the background became the signal there.
But
the neutrinos provided the ultimate background in that detector, and that became a signal. And in fact, they studied atmospheric neutrinos, solar neutrinos, and so on.
I want to, there's a comment made by Akshad Mishra. He says, I think an important need is a field of scientific journalism to emerge in India. That actually strikes a chord with me. It is one of the points I mentioned earlier. I think it is important, especially in India, that there should be this kind of professional scientific journalists who present a objective view of what is going on, writing in the journalistic style which they have been trained in, making it much more accessible than we can, because we are not trained to be journalists. We are not naturally trained communicators. We do our best, but at the same time there are obvious limitations in what we can do. And this is something that I've seen it coming up more and more, particularly in the UK. There is now at least 3 schools of journalism and Imperial College at Bristol who actually train people in a, there is a master's course. You can in fact do a professional course in how to become a science journalist, because more and more the traditional media also recognize the importance of employing on their staff somebody who can actually write something on whatever it is that concerns people, right? These people usually have degrees. They typically have even a PhD in some subject, right? But of course, you will end up writing about something which is outside your expertise. So most of all, you should be a good scientist. You should be able to, address all the questions, whether it is coronavirus or global warming or whatever. It doesn't matter if you trained as a physicist, chemist, biologist, mathematician, whatever, right? But most of all, learning how to communicate complicated ideas, right? For example, today I was thinking of how to communicate neutrino oscillations, and I couldn't think of any way to do it in 1 or 2 slides. It's a complex phenomenon, right? I mean, we know that. And I think I just want to say in that context, there was a sketch show on British TV. It's called Armstrong and Miller. 2 people, talk to each other. And this guy Miller was actually, he did a PhD from the Cavendish Laboratory in physics. And this sketch I love, because Armstrong asked this guy, Miller is dressed up as a scientist, and he says, Dr. Miller, can you explain to us in plain language what the meaning of this momentous discovery is? And Miller says, no, I can't. He says, sorry? He says, I can't, because only about 3 people in the world are expert at it, and Gron is on holiday, and Lafayette is not around, so only I know about it. Says, but surely you can explain to our viewers the essence of what you are working on. So he says, yeah, I can. Shall I start? So he says, please. So he starts talking. And after 2 minutes, Armstrong interrupts him and says, sorry, I know the program is only sort of 5 minutes. How long is this going to take? And Miller says, oh, about 11 years. Okay. And that is the truth, right? It takes about that long to understand a complicated scientific concept. You can't just say I understand it because you heard the buzzwords, and you even saw some labels, and you even saw an equation and you recognized a little bit of it. But the point is that we cannot afford to take 11 years to explain to everybody just what it means, what it is that is being done. So I think Akshat has made an important point that we need scientific journalists who can do that job.
So, but then, so we have had India has seen people like Bhabha and Vikram Sarabhai before, so they have somehow managed to do it. They have managed to. So can we draw some lessons from whatever they've done? As in,
Well, I think at that time in India, there was, well, in a sense, it was sort of, I don't know how to say this, there was more perhaps trust in authority
absolutely. I
figures,
think that's right.
right? There was more trust in authority figures. They were seen as people who were serving the nation, who, were trying to decide on the best way forward. And most of all, Bhabha, you must not forget, was a close confidant and friend of Jawaharlal Nehru. Okay. And Bhava not only knew Nehru, he also knew the Tatars. So he had both the support of commerce and industry, and he had the support of the government at the highest level, right? It is not surprising that he had that kind of backing. But look at somebody like Sarabhai, Vikram Sarabhai, right? He did not have immediately the kind of successes that Bhabha had. But in the long run today, what are people talking about today? About how ISRO is an amazing achievement. It wasn't started last year. It wasn't started 10 years ago. You have to go back quite a long time back to a visionary like Sarabhai, who could see why it was important for India to have a space program, right? And I'm sure he faced a lot of opposition in his time from all kinds of people, right? Because, the other point, Chandrasekhar, you understand as a physicist, there is a strong selection effect. We only see the successes, we never see the failures, right?
yes, sir. Yeah.
And we don't know what problems these people also faced. But actually, you bring up an important point. I think we also don't have any oral history in India. We have no record. All the senior people are now passing on, and we will not remember how it is that they actually managed to create these institutions that we are so proud of today. I mean, you mentioned JMRT, right? I knew Govind Swarup, we overlapped at TIFR, we talked to him a lot. He told me the story of how he built the first radio telescope in Ooty. What a challenge that was, right? And it was for a specific scientific goal, but it opened the door to the idea that India could actually build radio telescopes at a world leading level, as indeed the GMRT is. But it was a long road. And it is not that Govind had an easy ride. He was opposed at lots of steps. Okay. And in fact, I wish we had an oral history of Govind telling us about all the problems and hurdles that he faced, so that, of course, we learn from others who went before us by this kind of orally
Subir,
passed on.
Subir, perhaps this is already there, I think, because
It is there. It is
in
there in
TIFR
TIFR
there are
archive.
these oral history archives.
It is there.
They might not have been transcribed into books and so on, but that material is there. If somebody is interested, I think
they should put it online. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah. I think
This
right
was-
now it is not online. On request, they
Ah.
give you the audio
okay,
recordings.
that's
and
good
so
to
on.
know. Yeah. Anyway, I think we have talked quite a lot. I see that Rajaji is getting tired. So,
Yeah.
so I think, yes, so the point that you raised is important, that people in the past, all this, Shah and Sarabhai and Bhava and so on, and, more recently I mentioned Obaid Siddiqui, Govind Swarup and so on, they did set up successful scientific programs in the country in various areas, which have achieved something, which have really put that activity in India on the world stage. And surely we can do the same in particle physics. That's all there is to it, right?
So in
It's
some
just
sense, we
that
need
it is
to,
mega science. The
yeah.
point is that in mega science, you necessarily have to accept that because you're dealing with a lot of money, it involves a lot of organization. It necessarily involves agencies who are not, won't necessarily all be at the same cultural level either. You have to deal with a lot of other people from, engineers and administrators and managers and so on, right? And in this Ice Cube project that I mentioned, right, it was a huge project. It was professionally managed by people from the National Science Foundation. And I must tell you, well, that initially I did wonder, like, I mean, I was unused to the idea that there are professional managers. But after I got to know them, I developed a great deal of respect for them, because these are the people who understand the logistics of managing a $259 million project and how to make it happen on time, meet all the requirements, satisfy all the file all the documentation, satisfy all the regulations. These are things that scientists are not always the best people to do, to be honest. We need
So
to
have
work
we,
with professionals.
so for that matter, do we hire consultants and professional consultants from other firms or
Management services.
management consultants
Well,
to
I think we
do all
should.
this?
We need them, but at the same time, they also have to educate themselves and to some extent and meet us halfway, right?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, sure. I mean, I was talking earlier about. I mean, we also like to do things. Scientists also have this conceit. We like to do things ourselves as much as possible, because that's the pleasure. It may not always be the most efficient way of
It's
doing
already
it, but
happening. Actually, it is happening. I will tell you one example. The Fermi Lab, the Dune project you heard, the
yes.
accelerator building that project is currently led by an ex-Navy person. And he
I
had no ideas about any, accelerator
agree.
or anything beforehand. But he's a project man, so they have brought him and made him in charge of the project.
Yes, so we do. I think we do need professional management of that kind. But project managers who can take on projects of this scale are also quite rare.
Yes.
I know, because the guy who did Ice Cube was sought after keenly. He then went on to be the project manager for the European spallation source, and now he's moved on to, they're sought after because it's actually quite a rare talent to be able to work with so many people, especially physicists, right? If there are 100 physicists, there are 101 opinions, as you know, right? So we're not the easiest of people to manage either. But at the end of the day, we do have successes we can point to, and it is that which convinces us that we can progress further, because there are tangible and substantial achievements that we can point to, right? Both in terms of experiments and facts and theories and new developments in the field. But more so, I think the real legacy is the fact that we have this culture of transmitting our knowledge, to successive generations, and of training people. This is important, that we should continue this tradition. Okay, maybe we do it now through the internet instead of in the traditional way it was done in ancient India, but it's the same tradition. It's a matter of accepting that science is public knowledge. It has to be public knowledge. It is not something to be guarded zealously by one group of people or one caste or whatever. It's for everybody, right? It's open to everybody. We are not denying anybody the right to that knowledge, but you have to work yourself to get access to it, right? And it's the same. It's exactly the same whether it's classical music or painting or any discipline. Okay, nobody can demand that you should make them an expert sitar player. They just have to practice 11 years. It's trivial. It's, just practice 6 hours a day and you'll get there. And anybody can do that. That's the point. And it's the same with science. So
I
anyway,
was asking about,
I think.
yeah, I wanted to ask about the training school that you had mentioned during the talk that INO has. How is it? What is happening in that training school? Is it similar to, you mentioned BRC training school or TIFR
Yes.
education program? So is it like any other training school that PhD students are being?
Well, Vivek, can you answer that?
Yes. See, this is a kind of graduate training program where we select students on the basis of some written exam as well as an interview. Of course, the difference between the training school in BRC and this is that we can't at the present time offer them jobs. However, we can offer them training and also with an emphasis on experiments. Okay, so we want to basically get a bunch of people, bunch of young people who are trained in the experimental sciences. Because as Subir pointed out, we have a legacy of very good phenomenologists, but we don't have that many experimentalists. Okay, in the high energy physics community. And nowadays also, especially with the involvement in other projects, the actual action is taking place at CERN or Fermilab or elsewhere. So we have very little things which are actually built on a large scale here. There's some small things which are built, no doubt. So this is what we were trying to aim for, that INO project provides a something that you will build an apparatus of a considerable size, and these students are trained in the experimental sciences, so some of them at least will come back to INO after their maybe postdocs elsewhere and so on. That's the idea. So this has been running since 2008, and as Subir said, a little more than 40 students have
So this is again basic science oriented.
Yeah, so they do experimental work and theoretical, some phenomenological or computational work if possible. Of course, a few students have done only simulation and work and phenomenology, but the majority of students actually do some experimental work. So that's part of their that's something that we would like them to be involved in. And I think they are quite happy doing that. I mean, at the end of their PhD, they are.
One thing you did not mention, what
Yes,
they
yes.
do, this is related with this INO project.
Yeah.
Both theory, detector development, or the phenomenon,
Yeah, yeah.
all are related to the INO project.
But so the experimental background that they get enables them to go out and after their PhD they can go out in any of the experimental projects elsewhere, in CMS, maybe in Fermilab, whatever.
No, and
after all, a PhD is just a gateway to other
one
things.
example is that the query that this in Gransaso lab, there's who is controlling this cryogenic system. He was our first INO student.
First batch INO student.
Vivek Singh.
Yeah, Vivek Singh. He's actually in charge of the cryogenics at the QR laboratory in Gransaso, but he of course operates from the University of California at Berkeley. He's in the physics department there.
Yes.
Another question I had was when I earlier also mentioned that there were so many people in the as authors in that paper, and there were multiple slides that talked about institutes that were collaborating in the international programs. So I wanted to get an idea of what do these participants do? What do these people? How can all these individuals help in the INO experiments?
Can I respond that?
Please.
So it is actually, look at this INO project. What is it? If you look at the INO project, you have to build 30,000 resistive plate chamber. You have to design sophisticated data acquisition system. You have to design the backend software and the event building. You have to then data has to be analyzed, and finally, physics paper has to be written. So in the whole process, there are different kinds of work. You may have to develop some particular gas mixing unit, which will go through. I mean, one particular group in some university can work on that. Somebody may be testing the amplifier design. In a place like technology-oriented institute like IITs can help us in developing some of the front-end electronics. Okay, and some may be developing software simulation program. So you cannot do this by one institute or by few people. So you have to always. This is why the collaboration comes, and collaboration of different kind. So actually, so there is a book written by Hillary Clinton that it needs a village to raise a child. So I used to give that title as, when you need in old time in village, you need to, for a village to sustain, you need barbers, you need the goldsmith, you need every kinds of people. So in a high energy physics experiment, you also need of different kinds of people. From you are seeing that from computer expert to electronics, to designing, to theory, to everything. So that is why this kind of experiment needs different kinds of people, and that's why we need large collaboration.
I'm surprised, Pratyush, that you think that is a lot of people. On the Higgs discovery paper, there were 4,000 people.
Yes,
And that's what it takes. The higher, the more you want to achieve, the more people will have to be involved. And moreover,
4,000 from one collaboration. There are another 4,000 from the other collaboration.
And the point is this, and also notice some of the sociological aspects. They're all listed in alphabetical order, okay? Because it is part of our culture that we believe really in, not having any hierarchies. This is
there is no first author, second author.
First author, second author, yes. Last author.
So if you want to be a high energy physicist, ask your parents to call you Odd.
Yeah, order only. So who is the first author? Who is the second author? They ask.
Yeah.
Not in particle physics.
Not in particle physics. It's always alphabetical. And in fact, so this is what I was talking about earlier, that we actually have a fundamental commitment to equality, transparency, all these things, which is reflected even in the way that we publish our papers. It's not about personal aggrandizement. It's the collaboration that has done that achievement, right? This is why, in fact, even the award of prizes is so problematic now. If you want to give a Nobel Prize, who do you give it to, right? It was designed in the days, it was formulated in the days when there were few people. Now there are thousands of people who have all contributed.
Actually, Nobel Prize should be abolished now.
Well, or they can think of some.
So to give an example, IIT Electrical Engineering Department is the collaborator of INO. Now imagine that. So if you see in that list, you'll find it.
Yes. So this is essential for the. I see one question that I think we should. This was on YouTube, and this is from Jack K. And he says, essentially, why can't you go back to KGF? That again, Novo, can you answer that?
Yeah, actually, I went to tell you this truth. I went there last week, but not to go back to do science, but to see the state of the place. And I have some picture I could have shared with you, and I was crying there. And so many people have asked that why you have not continued in KGF. And KGF was closed down in 1992. And actually before that, an attempt was made. I mean, not for this experiment, just to keep KGF going for science. That time INO was not there. INO came 10 years later. So, but what was happening there? So we actually, the Ministry of Mines, Central in Delhi, they sent actually the Secretary of Mines to KGF and with the team, and they inspected, because that time Professor M.G.K. Menon actually was talking to the center. But then they gave an estimate that we needed 12 crores rupees per year to maintain the mines for us only. And that was 1988, 89, Indian foreign currency and condition was so bad, they couldn't even afford that 12 crores per year for us to maintain the mine. So they told that, no, this is too expensive. So it closed down. Once you close down, because you don't do anything, the water get accumulated, right? Just by the groundwater, it just get accumulated there. And slowly the water level come up. So if you now go there, there is a network of tunnels there. It goes up to 3 kilometers underground and some, 20 kilometers in the length, and there are many levels. So it's a network of tunnels. And all those are now filled with water, everything. Okay. So even if you want to do the experiment there, it is not possible now. But second question, now the size of the experiment, like INO, if you want to do, then it is actually, mine is also not a good place, because you imagine that you have to take down those 50 kiloton of iron and other sophisticated detectors, etc., through the SAP, that lift basically, which goes to it's very difficult. Whereas if you have under a mountain, you just drive your truck and straight away take out from the by crane, take away and start building your detector. It is much simpler. And it is just 2 kilometers of tunnel. Imagine how much tunnel we have built in the same area in the Western Ghat for the Konkan Railway without damaging their environment, and we need only 2 kilometers of tunnel.
Yes, that expertise is certainly there. That experience and expertise is there,
yes.
available. Yeah. Anyway. Okay, I think
yeah. So
now
I
gone
think we
on
can just
rather long.
end with one question which could encapsulate the entire thing. So since there have been a lot of environmental concerns which have been raised, whether they're baseless or not, as students and future scientists, probably we should be able to answer those questions. So my question is, where can we be informed about all these details of the INO project and its how steps are taken to avoid all these environmental concerns? Secondly, and what can we as students do to make others ourselves informed first, and then how should we go about informing others on so that I know gets more not popular, but so that we could discredit some misinformed claims.
Probably Subir has pointed out that you first go to the INO website and there is FAQ, and that is the first place to start actually. Okay, I think there are many questions, and after that there are people like Govinda Satyanarayana is there. You should start asking them. You should, if you have other question, you should ask them. But I think FAQ is written actually many iterations of that. It's a very good place to start.
Yeah. Yes, I think that's the first thing to do. And in fact, if you're not satisfied with the questions or the answers that have been given on the FAQ, then that is exactly how to start a dialogue. You might, in fact, as part of a project or your own interest, found out something which is not reflected in what you read there. The point is that these people are not doing propaganda. They have given the explanation to the best of their knowledge. If you think there is something in that can be corrected, changed, improved, they're very open to it at all times. But let me just share my screen briefly so you can see the see the web page in question, and you can see that so it's this INO TIFR resin, and as you can see here on the left hand side, under various headings, you can find almost all the information that you might want as a kind of a zeroth order. This is not everything. In fact, I would say don't get overwhelmed with the information. If you just read some of the things that are put in here, and then if there is more that you have concerns about, then you can actually contact. I think the contact address is also given here. Actually, Novo, Govinda, is there a contact thing here?
Yes, I think it will be there.
Yeah, it is there. If you see in the contact, it is contact us.
About us.
Contact.us.
Yeah. Okay, so there is an email you can write to, or of course they are also there on Facebook and Twitter and all the rest of it.
I was also trying to say, okay, there was a typo on the message that I put, but essentially we also have now a good YouTube channel called INO Project.
Yes, this one here,
where most of the videos are all available. Also, we run this sort of weekly popular public lecture kind of things. They are also live, casted, basically broadcasted live. Yeah, this is the channel.
This is the channel, and all these videos.
Yeah, you can actually see the title video is by Rajaji, explaining in a very nutshell what INO project is in Tamil. In fact, probably it's still running, but you can see all those about 60 odd lectures that are listed.
Yes.
And also most of the students, very tiny 2-minute lectures on what it means to the students.
Yeah.
We also have a very visible now, the Facebook page. In fact, your lecture is now being webcasted.
So this thing is, the Rajaji's lecture this is very good. This is about 12 minutes.
Yes.
Please, can this be translated into English also and put up there?
Yeah, actually, it was. I mean, there are also similar
Yeah.
nice small videos which also deal with designed by students and so on.
Yeah.
But this,
Yeah.
we felt that probably it will serve better purpose for the local.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, have an equivalent.
Yeah, we can.
Just 12 minutes
translate.
because people's attention spans are very short these days.
Exactly.
And it just is a bit overwhelming looking at all the videos you've got there. So first, I want a digestible little bite, 10-15 minutes, and then get into it in more detail. And it's great. You have got stuff on other things as well, which is not just INO. So
these lectures are spreading into nuclear, astro energy, neutrino physics, and so on. This has been happening during the pandemic.
Govindo has a sociological one here as well, which is not bad. That's good. I'd like to happy to see this. Great. Thanks for pointing this out. I'll also look at some of these.
Yeah, and as Professor Datta said, we also, of course, have both Instagram and Twitter run exclusively by the students. These are students, past INO students who are running this, and of course, Facebook is quite active. So that is where most of the things are kind of discussed. So even for the students who are asking about the info, those are the additional resources.
I think this is a good point to end on, because I think I've now basically covered most of the ground, but I don't know. Would you like to say something more, Chandrasekhar?
No. I think it's fine, because I think all of us also, we have spent almost 3 hours now.
Exhausted.
This is good. Yeah.
Exhausted. So I think you'll have to edit this video a little bit to make it more easily digestible if you want to put it online.
Yeah. So we'll be doing.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I mean, as I said, I didn't really have any answers to offer, but I just wanted to stimulate discussion. But there, at least, it has been successful. If you have gone on for 2 hours after the talk, but
after the talk, yes, exactly.
And I'm really very pleased that so many of my senior colleagues could join in and give up their time too, because they know the history of what has happened and they were there personally involved. And hearing from them actually makes it really come alive. But the point is that the story is not over yet, as Vivek reminded us in the chat box. Case is currently under sub judice in the Supreme Court. So hearing is on 11 January, right, Vivek?
Yes.
Yeah. So we're going to So let us hope for the best. But in any event, I think I find it very satisfying that we have been able to have this exchange of views, because this is the starting point. INO is not going to be the end of anything. It is just the start of something. Let's look at it like that. Thank you very much.
So, thank you to all of the people who came, who attended till the end. And
and just to let you all know, I'll make my slides available to you. You can, I think, maybe the best thing is if you can, under the YouTube video, wherever you had it, you could just put the link to the place where the slides are, and I'll also send them to anybody who wants them.
Yeah, so you could mail it to me, and I'll make it.
Do that. Okay, have a nice evening, all of you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Raji. Bye, Vivek.
Bye.
Okay.